Good evening, everyone. We're just going to hold off a few minutes as people filter in.
Greg, have you heard from Chuck?
I have not.
Okay.
So I'll give him another minute.
Sounds good. And just tell me when you're ready for me to give the technical.
Sure. I think you could probably do that. And also, for the first item, we may want to have Barbara and Kaz unmuted since this is a joint item.
Of course. Okay, well, welcome everyone. If this is your first time joining us for one of our virtual committee meetings, you'll notice that you're muted and you're going to stay muted throughout the duration of the meeting. Only the co-chairs will be unmuted at any time. As we move through the agenda, the co-chairs will call on members of the public who wish to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon at the bottom of your screen and pressing the raise hand button there. Do not press the wave or the thumbs up. Those buttons will disappear. Only press it once, because if you press it a second time, it'll go back down. Just look for the raise hand button and you'll be able to participate. If you're calling in from the phone, it's *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute whenever you're called on. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting whenever the co-chairs call on you. If you're having any problems, you can use the chat for technical support. It's only for technical support with the Zoom software. It is not to ask questions or make comments to the co-chairs. They will never see those chats. If you're using an older version of Zoom, you'll need to go to the participants section where you'll find the raise hand feature there. And finally, we ask you to not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen, as we might not be able to see you. If you're having any problems, just chat me. I'm here to support. I think Chuck will be joining in just a second. I saw him sign in, so then we can get started after that.
While we're waiting for him, I might as well just start with the introductions, if that's okay. So good evening, everyone. My name is Craig Lader. I am one of the co-chairs of Community Board 8's Transportation Committee, along with Chuck Warren, who will be joining us any moment. Thank you all for attending. Is that Chuck?
That is Chuck.
Okay, keep going. I just joined.
So I want to thank everyone for joining us. The first item on tonight's agenda is a joint item with the Environment and Sanitation Committee, and it involves a discussion regarding climate change and resiliency issues specific to transportation affecting Community Board 8. So just a little background on this, and then I'll let Chuck weigh in. And we also have Barbara Rutter and Cos Spagnoletti, who are the co-chairs of the Environment and Sanitation Committee, on hand. And I'll let them also speak as well at the onset of this discussion. But basically, following the severe impacts that we all felt from Tropical Storm Ida, it became evident that as a community board, we should be really propelling the whole discussion regarding climate change and the impacts of climate change on a local level to the front of our discussions within Community Board 8. So in conjunction with the Environment and Sanitation Committee, they are initiating, I guess, on a committee by committee basis, these discussions. So in terms of transportation, at least the way that I was thinking that we would frame this is that there are definitely a lot of issues that are specific to transportation that we may want to discuss. And I'll just name a few of them top of mind. By no means is this meant to be an all-inclusive list, and it's not meant to suggest any approach that we should be taking one way or another. I just want to at least put some things out there up front just for food for thought. So when we talk about climate change, we're talking about extreme heat, extreme cold, extreme precipitation events that could be rain or snow, and that extends to everything from the tropical events that we've been seeing, whether it be Sandy or Ida or Henri, or we could be talking about nor'easters that could have impacts like we saw last week, or severe winter storms that have increased the frequency in which we see record-breaking snowfalls and blizzards. And we could be talking about issues caused by excessive rain and by sea level rise or sea level tidal events such as hurricanes. So that, as that relates to transportation, could really impact a lot of things. Everything from, in regards to temperature, everything from potential issues with roadways such as buckling or potholes, or even how the heat island effect of Manhattan impacts roadways, and discussions regarding roadway designs and permeability of roadways. And when talking about heat island effect, even how we plan for improved tree coverage to hopefully help mitigate heat events. So, and then we have precipitation events that obviously we've all seen the impacts that it has on public transportation, whether it be subways ceasing operations due to flooding, or flooding in specific stations, flooding on local streets, the Fdr Drive, where perhaps I'd be able to identify certain locations. The impacts from major winter events, such as the impacts that the de-icing and salting of roads and sidewalk has on mobility, the impacts on pedestrians and cyclists caused by whether it be ponding from snow melt, or the challenges of frequently having to just remove snow, or maintaining access to bus stops during these inclement weather events. Then, of course, we have storm surges, not only dealing with the low-lying areas, but protecting New York City ferry infrastructure and the piers. And then other things as well that we may even need to think about that relate to the broader discussion, including policies regarding implementation of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and making sure that if there were a massive disruption to the energy grid, that we wouldn't cause further issues if electric vehicles weren't able to charge for a long time. So that's just a few top of mind things that I just want to put out there just to frame this discussion. Chuck, I don't know if you would like to add anything, because you have a lot of expertise in this topic.
Thanks, Craig. I think you summed up a lot of good things. I mean, there are a lot of there are a lot of issues that really bear on the environment. And one of the issues that comes to my mind, and we can talk about this with Koss and Barbara Rudder from Environment and Sanitation, is that, as I think most people know, we have the infrastructure here when it comes to our sewage treatment plants, and the combined sewer systems are very sensitive to all of these storms and all of these environmental problems. And when now, under ordinary conditions, when there's a tremendous amount of rain, the treatment plants can't handle it, so they shut them down, and untreated sewage goes into the river. And what that means is mostly the Hudson River, but it's sewage from all over the city, obviously. And it doesn't happen every day, obviously, but it happens a fair amount. And as you get more frequent storms and heavier rains, that's going to be a serious problem. The city requires separate sewer systems for both storm and sanitary sewers, but the majority of the sewer systems in the city today are combined sewers. And so we're going to get that problem until, and that's actually one of the sources of pollution in a lot of areas around the city, is the city's combined sewer overflow system. And as a matter of fact, one of the remedies that they're putting into effect at Newtown Creek and the Gowanus Canal is the city's constructing huge, big container systems that are going to hold the combined sewer overflow. And they're going to probably have to size them even bigger than they think because of the increased storms. And so when it rains like that, the combined sewer discharge will be pumped into those tanks, held, and then after the rain is gone, they will be run through the sewer system at a much slower rate so it can handle it. So, that's just the one problem that sticks out in my mind from all of this. And I can see that becoming a major problem. And that's going to become a major problem in our streets, because I think, as we all know, and Craig alluded to it, that when we get rains, the systems overflow anyway, and the streets get flooded, they're going to get more flooded. And so I think that's going to be, and that has an impact, obviously, on all forms of transportation. They're trying to protect the subways, but as we saw just in the latest heavy rain that we had a big subway problem, and I think that's going to continue to be a problem. So I think we're going to just see a whole cascading number of problems from this, and there's a lot of impact that it's going to have on the city, on our area, and in transportation, and obviously in environment and sanitation. And we're having a sanitation problem anyway. I think the garbage in our area has been piling up. I don't know if it has to do with the vaccine mandates, but that's another issue. But anyhow, that's all I wanted to say in the way of introduction. And I know we have the co-chairs of the Environment and Sanitation Committee, Barbara Rudder and Koss Bagnoletti. And if they would like to say something, they don't have to, obviously, but if they'd like to say something now, happy to have them do that. So I'll ask Barbara or Koss if you want to say anything.
Koss,
you want to go
first?
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Craig and Chuck, for being the first of many joint meetings with the environment and sanitation. We know climate change is coming. We don't know why, where, or when it's going to be, but it is coming, definitely, from what we've seen. And for us only to have it is just an enormous undertaking. That's why Barbara and I thought, to have a joint with all the committees, because it does affect every committee to a certain extent. Referring back to Chuck's about the flowing sewage and fresh water, I think a few years ago, the DOB instituted the installation of backflow stoppage from buildings. So now sewage does not backflow into the buildings, which is a good, it's a good start, but we have a long way to go. Anyway, I'd like to again thank Craig and Chuck for having this meeting. Barbara?
I also want to thank Craig, and probably with Chuck, for actually initiating the idea of us having the initial meeting. Our initial meetings with two speakers, and basically we talked about the problems, and what they asked us is to come back as a community board for our community, issues that we could identify. And, you know, with the help of Russell and others, you know, parks is certainly, greening is certainly a major part. I think housing will be a major committee. We're starting to contact these different committees. I think parks in next month's meeting will have something. One of the questions I have, and I don't know the answer, is Sandy and Ida were really two different types of storms. And I wonder if we should talk about them together. And this is a question, or whether we should talk about the flooding as such. At our meeting, I was extremely impressed with some of our people, or a couple of people from the community, that really came with amazing ideas. Lynn Strong from, I don't know if she's on the meeting, I haven't seen, from Roosevelt Island. Roosevelt Island is evidently working on a lot, for instance, new type of paving to have, or building materials that they've worked with, and certainly different greening effects that they can have. Housing, as you talked about the backflow, as Cos talked about the backflow, but there's even different processes with bricks. John, I'm blank with his last name from the mansion, Phillips, talked about what he's done in his restaurant of getting some sort of filter that changes the temperature in the winter to plus 10 degrees and in the summer minus 10 degrees. And he says it's not an overwhelmingly expensive thing to do. So there were so many issues that will affect so many committees, but I think transportation is overwhelming the number of issues you or we can talk about. So I thank you very much and look forward to long discussions about it so we can get back to our speakers with our ideas.
Can I just comment on one thing you said there about talking about Sandy versus Ida, that while there are different kinds of storms, and Sandy obviously was a rising of the rivers and an overflow coming from rivers and streams and things like that, and that had its own impacts. But the newer impact, and I think we're probably going to see more of that from Ida, is where you get a storm with continuous heavy rain. And this was the first time in New York City history where they ever had concentrated rain of that many inches. And that brings its own set of problems, because
Right.
it's not just areas that might be sort of in near the rivers and things, but it floods all over. And so I think while they're distinct sources, I think it's all part of the same problem that we have to deal with. So I appreciate you bringing that.
I was listening to some Zoom, and it was about the Negev in Israel. And I was shocked to hear that they have devised something for rain bursts, which he talked about as if we didn't know what that word was. And I was thinking that one thing we can talk about is maybe getting somebody, Cornell Tech, the tech stands for Technion. And I bet somebody from Cornell Tech would actually know what they do in the Negev, maybe something that we can learn from.
Good idea, because even though we're not a desert, we have a lot of pavement and a lot of things.
And we did have a rain burst.
Right, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just add, because I just looked it up, there in 2018, New York City transit officials said the subway's drainage system had the capacity to siphon off. Oh, wait, sorry, I think a video started playing automatically. Sorry about that. The New York City subway system had the ability to siphon off up to 1.5 inches of rain per hour, which generally isn't an issue, but as we see the increased frequencies in which we have this heavy, extremely heavy rain, you recall that we had, was it Henri, I believe it was, I've lost track of all the storms, but on August 21st, where we had the 2 consecutive hours where we broke single-hour rainfalls in Central Park, and then 10 days later, we had Ida.
Right.
So we saw these events within 10 days of each other.
Right.
And we're going to see this more often, which is
Mhm.
why I think it's so critical that we try to work together to come up with ways that we can hopefully address this.
Why don't we throw it, if there are members of the public, start out that want to comment or questions or comments, they can raise their hands and we'll recognize them. Are there any public, members of the public that want to do that?
We have one from Evelyn David, and I'll just remind everybody that if they would like to participate, go to the reactions icon at the bottom of your screen and find the raise hand button there.
Okay, why don't we unmute Evelyn? Sure.
Evelyn, it's *6 to unmute.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm so happy that you're discussing this and that I actually tuned in because I was thinking not, but anyway, so there are things I've been involved. I run a tennis site for NYJTL down at East River Park. I did for the month of October, and I know what's going to happen down there. Now they're really, you know what's going on over there. They're going to redo the entire park. They are totally worried. They are as worried as you are. Obviously, they're going to spend $1 billion raising up the land. And I kept thinking about surge gates because surge gates produce electricity. So you get enough electricity to, take care of Queens or Manhattan, depending upon the amount of water that's surging, and how many surge gates you put in. And I'm wondering just why is that has not entered into conversation? That's a question I have. Or maybe it's too expensive, but I don't think at this point, nothing is too expensive. I'm beginning to think, I don't care what it costs anymore because New York is in real trouble.
I guess, Evelyn, one quick answer to that, at least, and I'll let others chime in, is that only deals with one situation, as it says, surge gates, but it doesn't deal with the steady rainfall and the concentrated rainfall. That wouldn't do anything. And it is an expensive remedy. A lot of people don't think that's necessarily the best way to do it. They'd rather see some more natural solutions than artificial surge gates or, walls that they put up, break breakwaters and things like that. So that's a big discussion among exactly how you deal with some of these things.
Well, yes, looking at the Dutch who put up their big gates in front of, Amsterdam and Rotterdam, they had to because their land is below sea level. They also leave land to be flood areas. Now, we can't in New York City do that. So they decided not to do that for that 20-mile stretch or however miles that stretch is down there on the East River. But I understand because of the flooding on the streets and the subways, it goes everywhere. So it would just be a help for East River. Even starting up at Inwood, you could have a gate up there, and then going down the Hudson. No, sorry, the East River. Anyway, it would help with the flooding. It would have helped with the flooding in Queens, but I understand, we're landlocked, so that's another problem here. And it's just a question why surge gates never came up in the conversations, but anyway, you did give a quick answer, so I'll go with that. But I still think there's a whole lot more that's going to need, the tip of Manhattan is going to be, I hate to tell you, right. I don't even want to go there. They have to do something down there. And if it costs $20 billion, that's what it costs. That's the price that the Army Corps of Engineers has put on putting a huge gate up from, I think, Staten Island. I don't know. It's a 5-mile gate. So
yeah, but then
get ready.
At the same time, my question would be, I put up a floodgate somewhere and I'm going to divert the water to the next lower part. So it's going to be a snowballing effect, moving great amounts of water from one area to another, which is, that's why we have Corps of Engineers to look at it.
Well, I think there's going to be a whole redesign at some point of, how you divert water from certain areas to other areas. how you can have more natural areas that could absorb rain. We do away with wetlands at a quick rate and always have, around the city here, and not to mention the country. And so that's going to come back into the conversation too, because that's one of the things that you're going to need. You're going to need more areas that can absorb water.
Right.
And it's harder in the city with all the concrete, obviously.
That New York City is not built for being a floodplains. The only stretch that you have is along the East River, actually, and they're going to raise that up 10 feet. That doesn't mean that the water isn't going to go above 10 feet. There's the tide goes up 5 feet, and after that it goes up 5 feet when there's a surge. But water only goes one way, so you could, I don't know, could you keep it out to sea? I don't know. I haven't, I don't know. Yes, you're right. We need flood. That's what the Dutch did. They made natural floodplains.
Right.
But by buying off people and relocating them, and so they have these great areas where water can go naturally. But they still have the gates. So those great big things.
No, I know that. They have
anyway, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Evan. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for holding this.
Are there comments from the public? Any other comments? Because we have a number of board members I know who want to comment.
Yeah, I don't see anyone from the public.
You see any, Will?
No,
Okay.
there's
Yeah.
no one else from the public, but I'll just remind, if you'd like to speak or asking questions, go to the reactions icon at the bottom of your screen and press the raise hand button.
Chuck, before we go to any members of the board who are here, I'd like to just be able to read into
Yes.
To read into the record comments from one of our newest board members, Rit Agarwala, who, for those of you who don't know, he's his whole career is really focused around sustainability issues. He's a professor who teaches a sustainability class at Columbia. He used to be the director of the long-term planning and sustainability group for New York City under Mayor Bloomberg, and he's worked for Bloomberg, doing lots of work with sustainability. So he apologizes for not being here, but he is actually at the UN Climate Conference in Glasgow. So he did email some comments that he said we could just note, and this could also help move the discussion forward. So he said that the most constant issue with snow and rain is going to be the need for more frequent street cleaning. There will be ongoing tension between on-street parking and the need to keep the streets clean. More intense rainfall makes it far more important that the streets are clean because it is street debris that clogs storm sewers and exacerbates flooding. This will require fewer New Yorkers relying on on-street parking for 24/7 car storage. He says there is no one agency with overall responsibility for flooding in New York City. While there is a mayor's office of resiliency, it focuses on long-term planning, which is entirely appropriate, and does not have any budgetary authority necessary to create the kind of tactical changes needed. As a city, we will need to accept that the weather will require us to shut down more regularly. Just as we don't expect business as usual during a blizzard, we will all need to expect more frequent situations when the transit system shuts down, when driving is prohibited, etc. I'd argue that the city should ban restaurant deliveries during weather emergencies as well, given that so many deliveristas were put at risk during Ida. Cities with greater experience with storms generally tell people that they always need to maintain enough food and water to get through 48 to 72 hours on their own. Then he talks about the NPCC, which is it's the New York City Panel on Climate Change, and which is the city's official climate change projection entity. And he mentions that their most recent report suggests that under scenarios considered severe in 2019, the 79th Street area of the East Side is likely to experience monthly tidal flooding by 2050. Unfortunately, the most recent IPCC report from 2021 suggests that scenarios considered severe in 2019 are likely the ones we should be expecting and plan for, both given what is happening in the atmosphere and the fact that many nations, including the United States, are reducing emissions less quickly than is necessary. It's worth noting that New York City's greenhouse gas emissions have been basically exactly the same since 2012. And then he suggests that at some point we could ask a member of the NPCC to present their projections to us as community board, and their next report will be due in 2022. He then continues that a major challenge that Community Board 8 should consider working on is helping buildings, especially co-op and condo boards, address the retrofits that many CB8 buildings will need to do to comply with local law 97. And he knows that's not a transportation issue, but thought it was worth mentioning. And then finally, he says that we often hear concerns on the community board about disruptions to daily life that result from attempting to move away from using cars. The disruptions we will face from not doing so are far greater and will cost us billions of dollars in massive disruption, both due to the weather events themselves and the construction that will be necessary to move infrastructure such as the Fdr Drive out of the water's path. We cannot say we are taking climate change seriously without moving to reduce car use, reduce parking, increase transit and cycling, and make walking safer and easier.
No, I think my own personal view as someone who cares a lot about this issue, I don't think the world is going to do in the near term what really needs to be done. I think things are going to get worse before, hopefully, and you just don't know how much worse before things stop, because I don't think, even though there's a lot of commitments that are being made, I think there are too many other things at play. And you have countries like India and China who are still growing and have the world's largest populations. And they still have to figure out how to keep many millions, if not over 1 billion people employed. And I think while they're trying to, and the Chinese have certainly done a lot in terms of alternative fuels, solar and wind and things like that. Indians have done less. But I just don't think they're going to do enough. And I don't think we're going to do enough here, because I don't see the political will, even though even both parties now seem to be, the Republicans for the first time are surfacing some ideas about climate change. But I just don't see it. I think there's always going to be the way our political system works, there's always going to be certain parts of the country that have relied heavily on fossil fuel production, and even coal. We should be getting rid of coal, but and coal has disappeared a lot, but it's still going to linger around. And I'm pessimistic that we're going to be able to do the things in the time frame that they need to be done. So we're going to be suffering more from the impacts of climate change than before some of the things we finally get around to be doing kick in, unless there's some magic formulas that people come up with. One thing I saw is they're working on a certain kind of white paint that is so reflective of the sun that it apparently cools down places without air conditioning and things like that. And I mean, who knows if that works, but I mean, you're going to have to come up with some kind of magic solutions if we're really going to do it. Because again, I don't see the political will on a national basis or on a worldwide basis to carry through with it. I think people want to do it. And I think the climate conference people make a lot of pledges and stuff, although, the Chinese really didn't say much. The Russians really didn't say much different. And yes, as Greta Thunberg said, blah, blah, blah. She's being a little harsh, but she's probably right. And so I think we're going to be facing this. And I think, as you get closer to 2050, we're going to see, we're going to start to see increasing effects, bigger storms, more rainfall, heavier rainfall, everything that we've had and more. And so I think we can try to do what we can. And I think Local Law 47 that Rit and Craig were talking about, that's very important. And that is going to be an important scheme in New York City, because after transportation, that's the biggest way you save energy is by doing something about buildings. But it's a big cost to all the buildings, because if you really follow through on local law 47, it's going to be costly to a lot of buildings, and a lot of them, and the fines are going to kick in at a pretty heavy basis if people don't do it. So that's going to be a whole other problem that's going to have to be dealt with. But anyhow, why don't we, Craig, unless you had, I don't know if you want to comment further.
No, I'll reserve any comments for now. I want to allow others to speak.
Yeah. Why don't we go? Yeah. By the way, we told Rit that going to that conference was no excuse for missing the transportation committee, and we're noting that down. Rita Popper, I think, is next. Can we unmute Rita? We have a number of board members who would like to comment. We're happy to hear from them.
For the past 20 years, probably more, in Community Board 8, every time it rains, the same area getting onto the Fdr Drive is underwater, and the drive itself is underwater. It is not coming from the river, it is coming from the sky. And I've wondered why. I first of all, I don't know if the Fdr Drive is state, and I think Tricia Shamora told me that the Esplanade is a city, but the Fdr Drive is a state. Do we talk to each other? And why can't, if this is a small area, why can't we do something about it? It doesn't have to rain very hard to get this. In fact, if two women cry on 96th Street, the FDR is flooded. But constantly, and there are cars that are stuck on the Fdr Drive, and they're right there. It's just years and years and years and years. And I wonder, is there anything that we can do to take a small piece of property and fix it? And because there's no drainage, which is why that happens, or the drains are clogged and nobody cleans them. Is there anything that we could do to feel that we're doing something? We're getting ahead. Just a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. By the way, in the past, we talked about the FDR Drive. We have had, it is the state, and we've had the State Department of Transportation come, and we could get them back and talk about that as one of our things that we can schedule for a future meeting. I agree. But there's always, like you said, the Esplanade is a city overlapping jurisdictions. I only have to say one thing to you and you'll understand. 91st Street.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Tricia Shimamura next. Tricia.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad Rita said that, because I have a little notes here that I was writing down, and FDR was the first one on it. I know that we talked about this in Barbara and Cause's last meeting. I think we could have a year's worth of meetings talking about the overlap between resiliency and sustainability issues and transportation alone. And certainly with parks, I know, Barry, we're going to be talking about that tomorrow and next month as well. But so I'll leave the Esplanade alone for now. The only thing I want to say is just, Chuck, I'm really glad that you talked about our CSOs and our sewage issues. This is something that's very near and dear to me, and I just want to add more to this. The last report that I read from friends who do this work was saying that it's actually just all it takes is 1/10 of an inch of water to overpower our combined sewage system, to the point of where we're pumping raw waste into one of our waterways, including the East River. And as that relates to the East River and the Esplanade, that bothers me. I think that it's ridiculous that 50% of the time in our city, at least one major waterway is so toxic that we shouldn't be touching it. That's how bad it is right now. And when you talk to some scientists, they tell you that really at this point, when it's raining, we should be telling people not to be taking showers or using their toilets, because that is where we're at right now with our infrastructure, which is just ridiculous. I think it's pretty shameful that we're in this situation with our sewage system, and I think it's pretty shameful that the FDR is as it is. I don't see how we can grow as a city or thrive as a city with either one of those major pieces of transportation infrastructure and sewage infrastructure out of whack or out of date. One thing that came out of the last meeting that Barbara and Kaz had, which I'll say again, is that I think that a way to be productive for us is to work on creating a driving document for how our community would like for the values that we see in resiliency and sustainability, to talk about exactly where on the FDR we need to fix, to talk about where in all instances that we'd like to see porous concrete or porous materials being used, to talk about how many tree pits we want to see built in parks and other things like that, and to really have at the end of say a year or however long this takes, a real document that really describes where we want to be as a community. I think it would be useful for our elected officials to have this. I think it would be useful for science advocates to have this, to see how a community views and prioritizes sustainability and resiliency. So I don't know how you want to go about doing that, but I think that, in addition to us airing, because I could talk about garbage for a long time, but like instead of me just talking about sewage, which we can do, I would also love to talk about how we translate those concerns into something that can really make a change in our neighborhood.
Thank you, Tricia. I think that's a very good idea. And I think getting more green into the city, whether it's in the middle of streets or, around parks and things like that, has got to help the overall situation too. Next, we have Alita Camp. Can we unmute Alita? Welcome, Alita.
Hi, thank you. I think this is terrific. And to follow up on Tricia, the idea of a whole community board input, maybe with the help of some people who specialize in this, like you do, Chuck, or people teaching at the universities or working on research, to really explore, because I don't see how we could talk only about transportation without considering, as Tricia and you raised, the idea of more trees and what kind of trees and how frequently they should be planted and what should be going on in parks and what kinds of buildings. There's an organization in Queens that planted trees on a new building along the East River someplace, and provided a whole little forest up there. That may have an impact. Should that be something that's required of new buildings? Should there be a fund from developers? And Craig, for congestion pricing, since the idea is to better the environment by ridding some of the cars, should funds from that be earmarked for resiliency efforts through the MTA? Should there be more than one kind of lockbox so that there are funds dedicated to this? The idea of raw sewage flowing into the Hudson is horrifying, not just because it's kind of disgusting when you think about it, but also because of the impact on the wildlife that the city, the EPA, and you and I talked about it, Chuck, has spent so much time trying to clean up the Hudson River, and just the impact. There are so many areas that intersect and have the potential to either do better or to be impacted in a way that magnifies the impact of these environmental strains. And so there should be work that we should do and produce a report. There are a lot of committees that could be involved, and there are, I guess, lots of areas to explore. the idea of I guess I'm sorry for blathering, but the idea of enumerating both the problems and things that may mitigate. Maybe, as Wendy McCaver or Macaver pointed out, the height of the buildings has an impact. Maybe the fact that Manhattan grew 10% in the last 10 years, if my numbers are correct, that's had an impact on infrastructure. Maybe the restaurant sheds have had an impact on the ability of sanitation to clean up the streets. All of these are interrelated issues. So I'll just stop there. But I think that this is essential. And so thank you very much for taking the lead on this.
Can I just say one thing, Chuck? Alita, just for everybody to know, this is what came out of the meeting, is that it is so multifaceted that it will include lots of different committees. I thought that Barry said that you would discuss it next month. I'm not sure if it'll be tomorrow or next month. Would be parks. I'm trying to get in touch with buildings and possibly small businesses too, Alita. So you'll probably hear from Kaz and I about that. So yes, and then try to get something unified that comes by. Transportation was the first that came, but by no means is this only a transportation problem. No. Obviously, a buildings problem.
Yeah, but I think this initiative is great.
And long. It will not be a 2-month ordeal.
Oh
no.
Can I just I thank Alita, because I think in terms of getting some expertise, I know that I'm sure we could get somebody from Columbia has a climate change institute that's there. And the head of it is a friend of mine and a former partner of mine, Michael Gerard, who's a well-known environmental lawyer. And they have some terrific people there. And I'm sure we could get somebody to come to a meeting that we have and really talk about in some depth, the problems and possible solutions for urban areas, like New York, because I'm sure they're thinking about that. So I think that's a very good idea.
Right.
And but I should just allow a little digression in my own personal history. When I came back to New York to be the regional administrator of the EPA, Region 2, I met with my senior staff and I said, what are the major problems? And they said to me, well, one of the major problems is that there's 1 billion with a B gallons of raw sewage going into the Hudson River every day, not occasionally, every single day. This was 1980. And I said, well, that's terrible. What can we do about that? And they said, well, in order to really have an impact, the first thing you would probably have to do is to stop all development on the west side of Manhattan. I said, what's my second choice? Because I said, nobody's, we can't do that, obviously. So we started out and we talked to the New Jersey people who were, sewage authorities, and said, because they didn't have secondary treatment in those days on a lot of those plants, even though this was 1980 and the Clean Water Act was passed in 1972. So we got after them in New Jersey and we started making a series of investments on 2 major sewage treatment plants, the North River plant on the Hudson, which everybody knows when they go about 140th and 140th, 145th Street, and Red Hook. And that was between them, that was like 400 million gallons of sewage that got treated. And since then, it's become much cleaner. But going back to what Tricia was saying, the combined sewer overflow is the biggest part of the problem still remaining to be dealt with. And that's something because of the old system. It's always been combined systems. And just recently did they make it so you have to separate those systems when you build a project, but the overwhelming number of hookups are to combined systems still. And that's going to be a continuing problem that has to be dealt with. It's going to be exacerbated. So that's the up and downs of sewage in New York City. Let's see, Lori, Boris.
We actually, if we have Judy Schneider as a public member of the public.
Oh, Judy Schneider. Yes, I remember Judy Schneider. Hi, Judy. Can we unmute Judy?
Hi, Chuck and everyone. I just wanted to make a comment if we're going to talk about specific locations, because the 60s never gets thought about, but 61st and 62nd. And the FDR got terribly flooded during Sandy, all the way up to York Avenue and above. Those buildings along York didn't have elevator service, etc. And of course, that's where the EDC and the Parks Department is building our beautiful new park with our beautiful green lawn in that area along the Esplanade. So we want to remember that whatever we're going to do, that we try and do something to protect that beautiful piece of real estate that we'll have in 2023. That's all.
Thank you, Judy. Let's see, Lori Boros.
Yes, thank you. I want to thank all of you, all the 4 committee chairs, for having this meeting. I don't know that everything is connected to transportation, but one thought I had was, is there a way for us to encourage, I guess, builders, but also retrofitting the roofs of buildings? Because, there's a lot of research that if you have a green roof, with like plantings and et cetera, as opposed to just black tar, which many of them, have, that encourages, it reduces the use of air conditioning and, all the benefits. Is there a way that we can encourage both the development and the possible retrofitting of that?
Well, Lori, I think Local Law 97 is going to encourage a lot of that because, it's going to start to kick in a few years. And if you haven't made energy savings in your building, and you're going to have to, and that goes to your air conditioning, that goes to your heating, that goes to all kinds of things. And I think a lot of buildings are going to be looking at some kind of green roof solution to help reduce energy costs because the fines get to be very, very large. And it's going to hurt a lot of buildings if they can't come up with the solutions.
Came up is that the green roofs also collect the water rather than draining off, that they could help prevent some of the flooding. Yes, and that also was definitely on our list. If you read out the environment minutes, that was just definitely one of the discussions we had. I don't think that would be the transportation committee. I would assume that would be the housing committee, I think.
Right.
Right. Okay. And thank you for answering that. And then the other question, or the thing that I was just, and this does have to do with transportation, is after every single huge rainstorm and after every single snowstorm, there are puddles surrounding the crosswalks, and it's especially bad on ones that have the ramp, which they should all have, for accessibility for the disabled. And that is a really big problem for all of us, because even if you're not, first of all, because like a wheelchair really can't get through those things. It's like the cars that I saw under the bridges when I drove up, after a couple of days after the last storm, and all the abandoned cars. That's the same thing that would happen with a wheelchair. Wheelchair can't get through, 6 inches of water. But it's also bad for us because we can't walk through it. So I guess I don't know what the answer to that is, because I'm not an engineer, but it certainly seems to me that we have to pay attention to that, because it's, because we've all said that these storms are going to continue. And so we need to figure out some way to make accommodation for that. And I don't know what the answer is, but I just wanted to raise that.
No, I think on that, we're going to have to ask the transportation department to come and talk about that, because they do that stuff, and there've been issues about the drainage and stuff like that on various corners, and I think that's something we ought to have them address on a wider basis. Sorry, cause I know you want to say something.
Yeah, I know a few years ago the Street Life Committee started asking restaurant owners at the corners if they would basically keep the the 2 ramps clear and not stop any puddling. also lately or over the past couple of years, I've also noticed that some of the corners have been cleaned by the buildings. So I think it's a matter of trying to get the corner buildings to take care of it. But again, that's a big major issue. Is it DSNY, DOT, buildings, or everybody combined?
And I'd just like to add that this issue extends not only to corners, but to bus stops.
Right.
And any
Yeah.
bus that needs to pull over to the sidewalk in order to be able to lower the ramp for wheelchair access, it's near impossible, and that's going to continue to become a bigger issue as we go on, unless we solve the problem of how do we ensure that buses have the ability to reach the curb in a quick manner as soon as storms are over, and preventing snow plows and other people who are removing snow from blocking any access that's created.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Thank you. Next is Elaine Walsh. Can we unmute Elaine? Welcome, Elaine.
Thank you. I think the discussion is extremely important, but I think we can do some things immediately while we try to look at some of the long-term solutions that will cost some money. I'll comment on the last piece on corners. All buildings that are on a corner are responsible to clear the corner. Snow, rain, whatever. 2, the big issue in some prevention is putting the filters on the sewage drain. So when there is construction, the mud and all the debris do not go into the sewer system. How many have you seen that do not have that being done? Recently, 3rd Avenue, 79th and 80th had a water main break. I'm looking, what's this brown water coming? I'm thinking construction. Oh no, it was a water main. But nobody from the city went and put any prevention onto the drainage. What I'm getting to is a total lack of enforcement. The others is long-term. We have an immediate solution. Get the departments out there enforcing. DOB, DOT, but every building needs to be notified. They are accountable for the corner. And Lori, I agree. The crosswalks for the disabled, my partner's in a wheelchair. Let me tell you what it's like when it snows or rains. It doesn't work. So what we have is a misfunction, not just in our community, but in the city. So I'd like to put forward, 1, that the city start to enforce the regulations for construction, that there be the filters, etc. And that instead of just having a security person make sure the construction and facade work is right, but that they also look at, are they following the regulations for the disposal of the water and debris? Parking on the street doesn't cause this problem. It is the construction and the garbage that's not picked up on the corner that's allowed to flow into our streets. So I'm recommending we do some preventive enforcement and hold the agencies accountable. I see it, cars, we're on the same street. You got to see the same thing flowing that I'm seeing, right?
Yep.
This is unacceptable. And there's an accountability here. It's long-term, is all the other stuff is good, but if we don't participate in preventing the sludge that goes into the pipes, 79th Street, by the way, closest to the river, 515, 525, they flood every time. My building, I'm up between 3rd and 2nd, we have a little flooding. Let me tell you, when the super calls 311, there's no response. It's not our building that's flooding, it's coming in from the sewage lines. And that goes down and up the entire, and we're not the only street. So please, I would like to see us move with some quick preventive measures that should be in place. Thank you.
Elaine,
Elaine,
excellent suggestions, Elaine. I think we ought to do something about that. I never see any construction, when they're doing construction, I never see any situations where they're trying to prevent that stuff from going into the.
Yeah, one thing with construction, with the concrete, when they wash out the concrete mixes, that flows down the sewer and that clogs it up. They're supposed to have a bucket specifically for that, but some do, some don't. While the flooding, Elaine, you should check with the building if they have a backstop from the sewer, from the outside into the building.
Okay, I'll check. I'll double check with my building. Thank you.
The backflow preventers, that's what they are.
Yes.
They may have it.
And
That's not my
required.
area of expertise.
The city was enforcing that. They were coming around to everybody and issuing violations because our building got a violation because we hadn't yet gotten it in. It's in, but now.
It's called a
Backflow preventer.
Okay, I'll check.
But that's a good idea. I think we really need to, both of those things we need to put some focus on that. And maybe we should get DOB also, obviously. They shouldn't issue a permit without saying these are things that have to be done. We shouldn't issue a permit and there should be some inspection to see whether it's done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Propose a resolution? Or no? Is that?
We can certainly, if we want to. That's I don't know. It's whoever. If Elaine, would you like to do that? Can we unmute Elaine?
Or is a letter more effective? I have found in the past they respond to letters and not resolutions. So I'd rather have the committee write a letter about this and get a response. That's been my experience.
Okay.
Okay, I'd go for a letter.
We'll write a letter to DOT, DOB, et cetera.
Everybody, right. Thank you.
And our board chair, we'll get the board chair signing.
And the politicians.
Yes. Okay. Let's see. Next is Michelle Birnbaum.
Yes, thank you, Chuck. I'm listening to this conversation and thinking about primarily my thoughts reflected in what Tricia said, mainly in what Elaine has said. Everybody's got good thoughts and ideas. But it seems to me that the real thrust of our concerns here, and it alludes to what was just said, has to do with infrastructure and enforcement and taking advantage of all those mechanisms that are currently in place to solve our current issues. When you frame this under the monicum of climate change, that implies a very long-term process, a lot of assumptions, a lot of projections, a lot of what ifs, a lot of things. But what we have no doubt about are the problems that we are having in this community, in this city, at this moment, which are actually devastating us. And when you just talk about, clearing the cars to clean the streets, well, the sidewalk sheds and the open restaurant structures certainly have to be taken into consideration. And if we really want to talk to the city about keeping things clean and also the flow into the sewers and all that, they have to take under consideration the new things that they're initiating that are going to exacerbate these problems. For example, they made a decision about the open restaurants without even taking any of this into consideration. In terms of the Fdr Drive, that, especially around 125th Street, and I'm sure we can mention many other areas, that's been flooding for as long as I can remember. I would say 30, 40 years. And it had been looked in many, many times. And one report that I had heard as to why the engineers were coming up short is that it wasn't drainage, but it was the actual pitch of the highway.
I don't know whether or not that's true. That was the talk at one point, and then that was the excuse for why somehow it couldn't be corrected, or it would be difficult to correct it, et cetera, et cetera. But certainly with modern technology and staff of engineers, that problem should be able to be solved. The fact that it hasn't been is really very, very upsetting. I think that we have solutions to all these things that we're talking about. With current day engineering, all the updates, all the new innovations, everything that we have, the equipment, we have the ability to solve our sewage backup system, to solve our construction waste going into our drains, to solve, you know, getting people on board to keep the bus areas clean and the sidewalk corners clean. We have the ability to collect sanitation. We have everything in place, including updated engineering and equipment that we don't even know enough to speak about tonight, but that is extensive. I think we should do what Tricia said and Elaine said, and have some kind of a long-term list that we want the city to address immediately, not under the guise or the title of climate change concerns, but over infrastructure concerns. That goes to planting trees as well, maintaining our parks as well. It's all infrastructure, and this city is falling apart. We don't use any of our agencies effectively. I can't name one agency in this city that I can say is really on top of its game, is really doing a really terrific job. I challenge anybody here to do that. And I think we have everything available to us this minute, and that should be the focus of our letters that go out and of that driving document that Tricia spoke about. What can we do this minute? And let's call it infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Okay, next is Sharon Pope Marshall. Unmute to Sharon.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We do.
What's going on with my video? I'm trying to, but it's not working. I apologize for that. First of all, I really want to thank Chuck, Craig, Barbara, and Kaz. This has been a fascinating discussion, and really very much appreciate this initiative. What I thought that there was a thread that can be weaved through a couple of that were made, for example, with respect to street cleaning, even with respect to cars overall, and with respect to our sewer system. It is well documented that one of the major problems is that litter during these massive rainstorms, that litter clogs our drains. And, you know, I have found that countries have an entirely different outlook toward litter overall. So, for example, Chuck had mentioned China and its growing economy. You know, I can tell you, having spent some time in both Beijing as well as Shanghai, that I've been really in awe of how not only are there no trash cans, but there is no litter. And including in public transit areas, for example, in Tokyo, you can go into a public train station, and I am very much a public transportation buff, if you will, and find that there isn't even any litter on the train tracks, as well as no trash cans. And I'm listening to the suggestions in this discussion, and I tell you that I really think that I really think we need to have a focus more on how we view litter overall. Because yes, we have to reduce the number of cars, and we have to make sure that street cleaning does take place. I get all of that. However, if there is less litter to begin with, the drainage system to begin with, this is something that I as a board we can champion, and something that we champion almost immediately. It really doesn't have a government infrastructure, a huge government infrastructure cost. We can, as a board, develop our own campaign and really work on changing the overall outlook of how people view litter. And and I'm finding that in my own personal international travels, that it's just, it's completely, it's completely almost off the scale here in New York. Even when there are no trash baskets out, I'll see, and sometimes it's even an automatic, and I have to catch myself from throwing something, onto the street bed. But having said, this is something that I think that the board can champion and really address the issue of litter and the accumulation of litter and how that impacts our community, and certainly how it impacts when we have these events that we know are triggered by climate change.
Sharon, thank you. I have a feeling, however, and you talked about it. I've been in Tokyo. I haven't been in China. And Tokyo is an extremely neat city, but unfortunately, in my view, a lot of this is cultural. And you go from one extreme in Tokyo and maybe in Beijing or Shanghai, and then the other extreme is New York City, which is even more extreme than a lot of places in the United States. And first of all, there's a lot of food eaten on the street here. I didn't see any of that in Tokyo. I don't know what the situation is in Beijing or Shanghai. But secondly, New York is at the bottom end of the scale. And I think it would be a Sisyphean task to try to make a change that would be meaningful in that regard. That's just my own personal view of it. But I understand what you're saying.
I couldn't agree with you more. You're absolutely, and I'm also a foodie. I totally, so I totally get it, Chuck. But we have to try, because it really, doesn't cost much. And you know what? In the end, again, it's not something that it's something that would require something expensive from the city, and it is something that the board can tackle. But I couldn't agree with you.
Thank you, Sharon. Billy Freeland, I know, wanted to say something.
Good evening, everybody. I'll try to keep this brief. I thought Tricia's comment about a sort of dedicated list or statement about our needs is really on point. And, what I was thinking is, just like we have a statement of district needs, should this be some sort of statement of climate, to use that word, I know not everyone's a fan of it, climate and resiliency needs. In our district needs statement, we do have, in the latest version, it's at page 17, statements on core infrastructure, city services, and resiliency. And I think it's maybe a little bit outdated. It refers to, for example, a resolution we passed in 2012. So I think it would be great, perhaps if the Environment and Sanitation Committee, went through these 2 or 3 pages that are in our district needs statement and went through and updated them and took input from, say, our neighborhood associations to get very specific about the needs, in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and so forth. And to really build out a more dedicated statement. And it doesn't have to be that it's no longer in our statement of district needs, it belongs there. But I think it's such an important issue that it warrants being its own dedicated statement that we put out, perhaps with some fanfare, we share it with our elected officials, and we make very clear about what our resiliency needs are in the district. And that can be things like permeable pavement, I think, as others have mentioned, bioswales, and identifying areas where those belong on the Upper East Side and Roosevelt Island. One thing that caught my eye in the minutes from Environment and Sanitation's meeting in September was that the Sanitation Department's Marine Transfer Station study made a bunch of recommendations about how to mitigate flooding. And the minutes say that the majority of those recommendations were not implemented. So grabbing that study and going through it and seeing what is it that ought to be implemented, I think that would be a great start. And then ideas that others have mentioned already, green roofs, solar panels on roofs, cleaning out our catch basins better, making sure that the buildings know their responsibility for cleaning out catch basins, and things like just better trash cans. There are trash can designs out there that make it a lot more difficult for the trash to overflow. So those are just a few of my scattered thoughts on this, but I think having a statement that we really focus on, that we all contribute to, and reaching out to the community to get input is a really good start. Clearly, there's going to be some very systematic issues that we have to deal with, how we deal with stormwater and sewage, and that's going to be a citywide policy challenge. But again, getting very granular about what we can do in the neighborhood at a micro level, asking for bioswales, asking for better trash cans, promoting green roof and solar roof expansion and the like. I think that's going to be something we can really get our arms around and make a difference on in this next year. So those were some of my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Billy. I think that builds on what Tricia suggested, and I think it's a good idea. We could develop a list and something that we share broadly and stuff, and then go after some of these things to see that they could get done in it. Some of the things that were suggested by Elaine and others to get things done in the short term. Okay, we have a couple of comments from people who've spoken before, but I don't see anyone else with their hands up. So I'll call on Michelle Birnbaum. You had a further comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say to Sharon, I hear what she's saying. She's probably too young to remember, but actually an anti-litter campaign was launched by the city. Chuck will remember, and some of other vintage members like myself will remember, but there was a massive anti-litter campaign in New York. There were public service announcements on radio and television and all day long. It's a great idea. I wish they would do it again. Doesn't seem to be all that costly, and it seems that we probably need it again. When you talk about other countries, however, you talk about China, and I can also point to Singapore, where you can eat off the streets, and I've been in China, but you also have to remember penalties, that when you talk about countries like China and Singapore and other countries, the penalty for littering is extremely high, something that we couldn't, and thank goodness is not something we would ever do here. But that's one of the reasons. In Singapore, you're fined for chewing gum. Tokyo is not that way, but that is cultural. If you've ever seen a construction site in Tokyo, it looks like a sushi platter. It's the most beautiful thing you have ever seen, with every element of the construction project laid out in the most magnificent way. So that is cultural. But the others, a lot has to do with penalty. And I applaud I think we should extend an effort to get the city to do another anti-litter campaign. Maybe the new administration will be open to some of these suggestions. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Alita Camp had a further comment.
I'll be brief. In terms of litter, I saw a car cross ahead of me in a crosswalk going really fast, and then someone opened the window and threw a bottle out of the window. I think there is a sense that there's so much trash that what more does a little hurt, and a lack of pride. So anti-litter campaign would be good, but also I'm wondering if we should, in talks about transportation, make more of the ferry in the East River, and if there's anything that could be done by the ferry landings to improve resiliency. Could it be a place for oyster beds or growth of some kind of green plants to make the east side less subject to flooding? I don't know any of the answers to this, but when we're talking about things, we should be talking about the water too, if there is anything that could be done there.
That's a good thought, Alita. The Hudson River Foundation has been looking at, have oyster beds in various areas. And I don't know if they've ever looked at, the East River, but I think it's a good thought to explore.
There is a 96 jetty, Chuck. There's ropes hanging down, and they're doing studies on the oysters right at the jetty.
Okay, thank you, Cos. Thank you, Cos. Let's see, we had a couple. Well, Barbara can sum up. Valerie Mason, I think, wanted to recognize. So can we unmute Valerie?
Yeah. Hi. I just wanted to say we have asked. I don't know if you recall this, but when COVID first started, it wasn't always that you were allowed to eat in the New York City subway system. And when COVID began, I don't know if you remember, but I asked Marcus and I suggested that the New York City Transit try to go back to their old rules where you were not allowed to bring food and or drink down to the platforms to reduce, the trash, et cetera. So in furtherance of that, we never heard back from Marcus on whether that got any traction. But for many, many years, you were not allowed to eat or drink on the New York City subways. And it was much cleaner down there, and we didn't have as many rats. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, thank you. We should follow up on that, Valerie. Thank you for that. We'll find out what they're, because they ought to go back. People, you would occasionally see people eat, but you weren't supposed to eat, as you said, until the pandemic. Barbara Rutter, why don't we conclude with Barbara?
I hope Kaz interrupts and agrees. I want 2 points. One is the street cleaning. We've had a few meetings about it. Valerie will know. There are so many problems with the garbage pails. They come and they fix the garbage, the doors, and it breaks again, so that garbage overflows. It is not an easy answer to say, how do we clean it? Nothing is easy along with it. So we have had meetings, and maybe Kaz, we can have more sanitation meetings about how to fix it again, because I notice a lot of the garbage pails are broken again after they were fixed. On a broader point, what I think, and I agree with what Tricia had said and others also, that we need sort of a list of what we can work with. And I don't think we have the easy answer. And I think that we can have experts. It sounds like we have Rit. I never knew what he did. I once tried contacting him and didn't get back. It sounds like we have an expert right on our community board if he was in Glasgow. That's pretty impressive. And I think that, so issues such as, what can we do with the pavement? Are there new types of pavements we can have? So whenever anybody redoes their sidewalk, they have to use this type of pavement rather than the other. When streets are redone, are there different types? And by the way, the white paint that was talked about was also for the streets to reflect some of the heat. What about how what can we do about electrifying our buses and having something convenient to do it? So there are big issues with that I don't think we have easy answers to. I'm just going to give one anecdote. I visited a friend that lives on the beach this past week. And we were sitting by the walking by the ocean, and she said, "Did you hear they're going to put these windmills in the ocean?" And I said, "That's wonderful. Isn't that exciting?" And she said, well, she was on a 3-hour Zoom, and the fishermen are all up in arms because these windmills will interfere with the fish, fish catching. So nothing is easy. There's always something that's not right. And I really think that going more in depth with some of these issues would be for future meetings.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. I thank everyone. I think it's been a good discussion, and we're going to certainly continue, and we'll work with our friends in environment and sanitation, and we'll come up with a list. And like Billy was suggesting, get a broader circulation of the list, get some ideas, and then we'll see how we can try and implement those ideas, and the appropriate committees can work on implementing those. I think it's a good idea, be a nice initiative, and so we can see what we can do on a local level here, even though we don't have the kind of sway that would affect worldwide events, but
No,
do some stuff here. Good. Well, I thank everyone. That was a good discussion. And,
thank you, Craig and Chuck.
Thank you.
Yes. Our next item is a continuing discussion of bike registration and license plates. And we've had a discussion, and it's part of a continuing discussion that we want to have as to what we can do. And I think we were looking at the idea of, focusing on registrations and things like that. And so I don't know if there's any members of the public that want to discuss this or have comments about this before we then go to the board. Do you see anything?
Yeah, Charles Whitman, sorry.
Charlie, I don't think do you have a discussion on? Okay, go ahead, Charlie. Sure. I didn't know whether you had
just hit unmute.
Yeah, hit your unmute button, Charlie.
Yeah, I'm a biker, and I wasn't in on I missed the earlier discussion, the prior one in last month, and I didn't know whether they were looking at it in a broad swath where really, to me, the biggest problem is anything that's motorized. And it's just not bicycles, but it's the scooters, it's the unicycles, it's anything that really increases the speed of getting around. And I think if you're focusing on bicycles, it's a good start, because I assume they're looking at both the regular bicycles and then also the motorized bicycles?
Yeah, I think the idea would be include all ways of transportation, pedaled and motorized.
Motors. Okay. Yeah. Because just to give you an example of the type of thing that I was driving my car on First Avenue, and I had a scooter that actually was going faster than I was, and I was doing 25. So that gives you an idea of something of the issues that we have in terms of the actual speed but no, I think if it's been covered, then that's fine. To me, if it's casting a broad net, but it looks like you're going to have to take bite-sized chunks to be able to manage certain portions that are more easily handled. Was that the feeling?
Well, we haven't. We just started really to discuss it, and I think the feeling is it's a hard sell. Probably have to get the state law changed to put in some kind of a program like that. And there'll obviously be a lot of, there has been a lot of resistance to it in the past, and there really not too many places that have successfully implemented it. How you approach it.
Yeah, I'll just listen to more of the discussion, and then maybe I can add something more as it goes on. Thanks.
Sure, absolutely. Appreciate it, Charlie. Other members of the public, do you see anyone? I don't see anyone myself. Anything?
Just remind everybody that they can participate by going to the reactions icon at the bottom of their screen and use the raise hand button there, or *9 if you're on the phone.
Okay, I guess I don't.
We have Evelyn David
Oh, okay.
and then Kathleen Steed.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry, I didn't see that you got me there. Okay, can we go to Evelyn? Unmute Evelyn.
Evelyn, you're unmuted.
Yes, thank you. I know I spoke before. I'm completely in favor of licensing anything that moves down the street, only because maybe the majority of people on these bikes or whatever it is that moves are obeying the rules, but the ones that do not are causing all kinds of issues. And if you have licenses, maybe the bikers that are going to blow through the next light, they'll think twice about it. Okay? I mean, anything to get them to think twice. The other day, I was trying to get back home in my car. I was coming back from somewhere, and I'm making a turn on 61st Street. A bike is going catty corner from one side of the street to the other, the wrong direction. He looked at me like a deer in floodlights, and I just I just beat my horn and went nuts, yelling at him, like, "What are you doing?" You know, I almost got him. I mean, it's the first time, but I'm just saying, anything to deter not obeying the rules. The cars we're always very cognizant of the speed limit, and that's, you have speed controls for that, and there are license plates. So just give it, and I know it's a long way to go because it's Albany that controls this, but to have let it loose in the beginning without controls, maybe that was a mistake. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. That's the way I feel.
Thank you. Sure. No, I appreciate it. I guess, let's see, we had Kathleen Steed, I believe, was wanted to be nice. Yeah. Kathleen, can we
I was actually at the last transport meeting, and I think I was one of the 2 people who spoke about the hazards of being elderly, disabled, and on the street with bicycles coming from every direction. I looked up the rules, and it turns out you can be 16 years old. You don't need a license or registration. You can just simply get on a bike and go. I don't understand why a moving vehicle that can go up to 25 miles an hour and mopeds can go 35, why they don't have some kind of regulations or licenses. I mean, simple things like, presumably everybody knows bikes are not on sidewalks. Forget that. They can be on sidewalks coming every which way. So I will add to the people that want some kind of regulation. I don't know that there's anything anybody can do now as far as police presence. Is there a law that they're breaking if they're going under 25 miles an hour and are over 16? Anyway, thank you.
Yes, if they're on the sidewalk, they are breaking the law, but not that they're necessarily seen, but they are breaking the law. And if they're running red lights, etc., they are breaking the law. But enforcement is obviously an issue. Any further members of the public who want to speak?
I don't see any.
Okay. Why don't we go to the board members, and I'll start with Michelle Birnbaum. Can we unmute Michelle?
Yeah, thank you. I actually wasn't going to do it, but I am going to do it. I think the time has come. I'd like to make a resolution that the board support licensing of non-automotive vehicles, all the mopeds, motorcycles, bicycles, whatever category we can fill in. And let me speak to it if I may. Most of you know I felt this way for a very, very long time, have probably introduced this topic.
I want to ask for a second first, if it's second before you. Is there a second to that motion first? Did somebody second that? I assume, yeah.
It was waving, so I'm going to take that as a second.
Okay, that's good enough. Okay, go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Anyway, I've been talking about this for a very, very long time. The time has actually come, and the mood is different in Albany. This has to come from the state. We know that. I think the city council has the right to pass some kind of law, but it really is a state thing. But the time has finally come, and the state, they are working on bills for this now. And I think we can help them to that effort. And one of the reasons that it has been unpopular in the past is because New York State is a very big state. The cities are varying sizes, very, very small to very big ones like ours. This kind of a law may or may not work in every city. And so the people upstate have different feelings about it. But there is a way to write a law that can limit it to cities like New York. You can say licensing necessary in cities with over 1 million people. You can exempt 16-year-olds from having to license their bikes. I'm talking about the bikes because the reason I'm interested in this is because we don't have a way to identify the entity that causes the problem. A policeman can't run after for bike rides and hit somebody. You can't run after it. You can't identify it. Even if you catch it on a street camera, you don't know who it is. That's really the reason for licensing. And it's the reason, that's what keeps the automobiles in shape. I mean, if they had no licenses, license plates, which identified them and could be seen from a distance. Can you imagine the chaos? I tell you, this has been building for many, many years, probably 6-7 years that I can even, and maybe even longer than that. But I tell you, I drive all the time. I'm a driver, as you all know, and a very experienced driver, and not a frightened driver. And I can tell you, I have never seen anything like what's going on in the streets now. On any one block, I could be confronted with 3 or 4 different kinds of entities, whether it be a motor scooter, a bike, a kid on on a skateboard, a bike on the side, coming at me from all different directions as a driver. If I'm trying to make a right turn, a bike can be passing me on the right. I have trained myself to look in those right and left-hand mirrors, even if I'm making a turn to that side, which years ago you never had to do because there's no room for a car there. You would never dream that a bike would be trying to pass you. Anyway, it has become absolutely impossible. I think Albany would be very receptive to this. And I think we could pass something in the state if the law is written correctly. I don't want to propose tonight that we write the law, but I do want this resolution to have all of the whereases that people have said over all these many years and meetings and discussions, with the therefore be it resolved that it's time to have identifying plates on motorized vehicles and bicycles. So I hope we can support that. I think it can be written in a way where other parts of the state will be receptive, and where clear thinking, realistic people, whether they be motor scooter riders or bike riders or automobile, whoever they are, can finally come to the conclusion that this is really a good idea and necessary for the safety of all of us and the pedestrians, but really the safety of all of us. You know, the bikes and the motor scooters are the smallest entities on the road. If they get hit by a truck or a car, they're the losers. They are the most vulnerable. They're the biggest risk takers, but they are the most vulnerable. So I really think it's time, and I don't think it's unrealistic. And I'm hoping that the committee and ultimately the board will go along with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Next is Valerie Mason. Can we unmute Valerie?
Hi, I agree with what Michelle is saying. I mean, I guess I had sort of a stopgap measure, you know, and I don't know whether this is state permitted or not, but New York City has the ability to license dogs. And so if it doesn't fall under the Department of Motor Vehicles, I guess I would say as an alternative, if we can't get Albany to do it, then it's something we should look at a city level in terms of licensing bikes the way we license dogs. But I would also say that we should address the fact that many of these e-bikes, or whatever you want to call them, are now being parked on our sidewalks. And while NYPD is having an issue with enforcement while they're moving, I would certainly want us to encourage enforcement that these bikes should not be permitted to be chained to what is supposed to be non-motorized bike stations, as well as, we're literally being left on the sidewalk with their kickstand. And they can't even be ticketed now because there's no information on them. So at the very least, there should be some kind of mechanism where they have to be identified, and they should not be permitted to be parked on the sidewalk. Again, the sidewalk is the most precious space we have and should be available to pedestrians and not for the parking of these vehicles, or whatever you want to call them, and especially for free. That's it.
Thank you, Valerie. Rita Popper, I believe, is next.
It's so funny to follow Valerie on East 96th Street. East 91st Street has always been closed to vehicular traffic, but not to bikes. And there is a sign at either end that says no bikes only. But an e-bike, whoever gave it that name was brilliant, considers themselves a bike. And now we have racing of those e-bikes because whoever owns that also feels that they're owning something that looks like a motorcycle. It has that whole cachet of bells and whistles and whatever, even though it's a motor, whatever they want to call it. But we have a problem because that sign says bike and they have an e-bike, and therefore they're allowed anywhere that they want. And to Valerie's point, they are only parked on the sidewalk, only parked on the sidewalk. And to Michelle's point, we have been talking about this for years and years and years, but we have a new class of bike, the e-bike, and if it didn't have the word bike in it, I wonder if it would be treated the way it is. There's something wrong here. I don't know what it is, but I just want you to know that we have races on 91st Street if you want to come and see them.
Thank you. Thank you, Rita. Next, we have Sharon Poe Marshall. Sharon?
Thank you. I first want to say that I am a cyclist as well as a driver. I do own a car, which I use. And like how I consider myself to be a very careful driver overall. With that said, I am very much opposed to any type of licensing of cyclists. First and foremost, I think that licensing of bikes or cyclists is a deterrent to more people biking. And we need to do the opposite, which is to increase more people biking as opposed to less people biking. I am sympathetic to the acrimony between drivers and cyclists as well as pedestrians over the years. I've been on this board for quite a while, and although I do own a car and also I do own 2 bikes, in fact. I consider myself to be pedestrian first and foremost because I actually walk more than I drive or than I bike. And I would dare suggest perhaps that is true for drivers as well. And I think that the acrimony is because there is a considered tension between, or I will suggest inability for being open, sharing the road, but also with people in general not really seeing our street beds as open space. In the way that we see our signs. And so I have found, and for me, I see driving, I see walking, I view cycling or skating for that matter, or the use of scooters as complementary modes of transportation. I am not the type of person that places a greater value on automobile use versus the use of a bike or the use of a pair of skates or the use of a scooter. I see them as complementary modes of transportation. And for many, many years, our street beds have been the focus of automobile traffic. Automobile traffic has had the sole province, if you will, of the street bed. And the issue, and I agree with Ellen, for at least a decade or so, as more and more people suggest, hey, wait a minute, the street bed is just not for one mode of transportation. It can, with good planning, it can accommodate a multiplicity of and with that said, we do need to take a look at this in the larger picture as well, and in terms of climate change. And we cannot look at these things in isolated bubbles. We have to make these greater connections. And climate change does very, very strongly suggest that we should be promoting and biking and skating and scootering and whatever else people are doing, in addition to the use of cars, if not reducing cars, which I do think that we need to reduce the use of our cars, which is something certainly that I'm doing as well, and we all should be doing. And with that said, I would suggest that licensing will not do anything more than what licensing of automobile drivers have done, or what permit car registration has done. This year alone, we're on track for having a substantial number of vehicular traffic crashes resulting in significant number of deaths across the city, I would posit that it is not certainly about drivers who have been licensed, or vehicles that have registration permits. We still have those significant numbers of crashes, and so it's not going to result in any type of reduction, or even a reduction in bad behavior. I'm extremely sympathetic to the bad behavior of automobilists. Of automobile drivers, of pedestrians that dart out into the street, and cyclists who certainly, in some cases, if you stop to talk to them, they do know better, and they just didn't. And that is the case with automobile drivers and pedestrians as well. And so I would have to vote against the licensing of cyclists, or the enacting of permits, of requiring permits for cyclists. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. We have a member of the public who I see has raised her hand. I'll call on Kathleen.
I think she's spoken already. So
on a different
This is brief.
different subject.
This is brief. On my block on 3rd Avenue, 90th Street, there's a 15-minute delivery shop filled with electric bicycles. There's another one that just opened on Lexington Avenue and about 93rd Street. It's obviously a very profitable business, which seems to be increasing. There's also an e-bike shop that's about to open on 86th Street. So it appears that the problem is going to be expanded by multitudes of people wanting quick deliveries or buying e-bikes. That was all I wanted to say. It's going to get worse. And I'm all for licensing and registration.
Thank you, Kathleen.
yeah. And Chuck, before I forget, we had promised Elizabeth Ashby that we just relay her comments, and she was unable to make the meeting.
Yes.
Yeah, she said, I think that bicycling is an environmentally friendly and healthy way to get around, and hope to be able to give it strong support in the future. However, the near total failure of New York City bicyclists to obey the laws, and the near total failure of New York City police and park enforcement officers to enforce them convinced me that it would be irresponsible to support anything that encourages bicycling until the current dangerous situation is corrected. Licensing and license plates seem like a good way to start. I hope that those who are opposed will propose effective alternatives. That was her statement.
Thanks, great, right. Elizabeth sent that in, she couldn't make it. So let's go to Billy Freeland next. Billy, can we unmute Billy?
Thanks. I just want to begin just on a clarifying point. It's my understanding that mopeds, and there's 3 classes, Class A, Class B, Class C, are all required to have licenses and registration. And the registration is with the New York State DMV specifically. So, it's just so that we're all on the same page. That is what the law is. Whether there are unlicensed mopeds and whether there are other issues is worthy of discussion, but I just want to make sure that we're on the same page about what we're talking about. Then there are obviously regular bikes, and then on top of that, there are e-bikes, and there are 3 types of e-bikes. There's pedal assist, where you have to pedal, and that gives you a little bit of an electric boost. There's also throttle bikes, where you sort of just press a button or squeeze your handles. Those are Class A and B respectively. They're capped at 20 miles per hour. And then there's a third class, Class C e-bikes, that are capped at 25 miles per hour. Those are also the throttle type of e-bike, and those do not have a license and registration requirement. I know at our September meeting, we discussed this and we said, and this is right from the minutes, that at a future meeting, we might have potential speakers highlighting examples of how licensing and registration has been implemented elsewhere. In my opinion, it would be a mistake for us to move forward with any sort of resolution without having that type of discussion, because it's my understanding that where licensing registration regimes have been implemented, a few major problems arise. One, very stark racial disparities in enforcement. In Fort Lauderdale, for example, 86% of citations for cyclists in Fort Lauderdale were for cyclists who are Black. In cities like Oakland, Washington, D.C., and New Orleans, just based on my sort of preliminary review of the research, other findings of racial disparities in enforcing bike licensing regimes. So I think that's something we should grapple with and hear from experts about before we simply vote on a resolution. Another perhaps unintended consequence is that when you have licensing and registration regimes, you have, in turn, you have a major decrease in cycling. There's a lot of evidence that more cyclists creates more safety. This takes a few forms. It's the safety in numbers approach, where when you have more cyclists on the street, injuries, crashes, and the like go down. And just to give you, a personal experience as a cyclist, when I'm in a bike lane with 10 other cyclists around me, I have to be mindful, not just of the cars and pedestrians that are always there, but the cyclists as well who surround me. And we socialize each other to stop at lights. I've noticed many times I'll stop at a red light. The cyclists behind me, perhaps they wouldn't have stopped otherwise, but they then in turn stop. So I do think we need more cyclists on the road for that reason, but we also need to be more visible to drivers. And when you just have one cyclist on a street, frankly, it's a lot easier for drivers to ignore us. Just last month in Queens, and I'm sorry for going on, but I do think I hope these comments are helpful. Last month in Queens, a cyclist was killed in a bike lane. And it used to be a quote unquote protected bike lane with flexiposts, those sort of movable plastic posts that you see, except the posts didn't exist anymore because they had been mowed down and destroyed by cars on that particular bike lane. So if you had more cyclists, I think you'd get better cycling infrastructure and you get better driver awareness that we are out in the streets. I also want to give context to this discussion in terms of the risk of injury or death on the road. The figures I have from January 1st of this year through June 25th, so a little bit outdated, was that there were 2,870 crashes causing injury by cars, vans, trucks, and the like, and only 132 caused by e-bikes and mopeds. And I don't have it break down exactly, but many of those may be by mopeds. In 2018, less than 0.5% of crashes causing injuries on the road were the result of e-bikes or mopeds. So I think, in terms of our priorities as a city in designing safe streets, here's what I'd like us to do. I'd like us, I'm not saying these are mutually exclusive, but to be much tougher about injuries caused by cars in our city, designing our streets, recognizing that reality, but also designing our streets to be safer for cyclists, like the cyclist who was killed last month. I believe there's now been 15 or 16 cyclists killed this year in New York City. And Elizabeth's comment that she wrote in, I thought was, very helpful, in that she mentioned for those of us, opposed to licensing, well, what is your alternative? And I think a few things. One, let's work with companies like, I believe Ms. Steed mentioned the new 15-minute delivery companies that are arising. I think this is something we really have to have our eye on. It's going to be transformative for good and bad in our city. Making sure we're working with them to adequately train their employees on the rules of the road, making sure that they're educating those employees who use mopeds, or that they're making sure that their employees who use mopeds are licensed and registered as currently required by the law, making sure their employees who use other bikes like e-bikes and traditional bikes are following the rules. Similarly, working with Seamless, working with restaurants in our city. I know John at the mansion does a fantastic job, at least is my understanding, of working with his employees to make sure folks know how you're supposed to ride in our city. So those are a few ways to start. Also, lastly, on this issue of the bikes being chained to the sidewalk, no one thinks that's ideal. From the cyclist perspective, we'd like to see more dedicated bike parking, using a parking spot here or there to have a bike parking facility where bikes can be securely parked. Exploring ideas like that, those are solutions to, I think, better use our streets, create better infrastructure, safer infrastructure, and make sure that we all feel comfortable, because everyone, cyclists, drivers, pedestrians, we all have a right to feel safe on our streets. I think that's the right approach. I think licensing would have those unintended consequences, and therefore I'd oppose the resolution. And I certainly think we should hear from experts before we vote on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Billy. Next is Alita Camp. Alita? Can we unmute Alita?
Hi, yeah, thank you. I don't know, Billy, what you mean by mopeds, but Vespas I've seen with licenses, those little tiny motor bikes that are very small, they're not licensed. And when I asked a cop about it, as the bike went right by him the wrong way, he said they're too small to be licensed. They don't fit within the registration category. And those are a really big issue. I've seen them flying up Lexington going north. I've seen them go through red lights to make turns, to go straight through an intersection. They're treated like bicycles, and we know that bicycles don't always follow the law. Pedestrians need a lobby. This isn't just about the difference between cars and bikes or any kind of electric or any kind of alternative transportation, including scooters. It's about pedestrians too, and pedestrians who have trouble walking on the sidewalk. I see bikes going on the sidewalk under scaffolding, and you know how much narrower they make the sidewalk, and they don't care. I spend a lot of my day when I'm outside asking bike riders to go in the street because it's safer. Mostly I get cursed at. The other times I get ignored. Rarely does anyone ever get off the sidewalk and into the street. It's a big problem. And if registration deters people from getting bikes, then maybe there's a problem with the way those people intend to drive or ride. If there's an enforcement issue, the alternative is not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, I would argue, but to have better ways of enforcing and to make sure that enforcement is even-handed. Pedestrians need to feel safe. Bikes need to feel safe. Cars need to be able to do what they're doing. I think people are really frustrated. There's a maddening amount of traffic in New York. Lexington is down to one lane almost all the time, between the bus lane that's dedicated 24 hours a day and the deliveries on the east side of Lexington. There is one lane. It frustrates people, which is not to excuse what they're doing, but people get frustrated, bikes get frustrated, and there are accidents. But that's not a reason not to have enforcement. There's just not enough thought given to pedestrians. Yes, there should be bike racks on sidewalks, but where there's clearance, and we've seen now we have the added introduction of restaurants on the sidewalks too. And I just want to add something, because the scooter company came to this transportation committee twice and made a very big deal about talking about how its riders are monitored, and if they break the law, if they break their rules or the law, that they are, I guess, banned from being able to rent again. That's just not true, because I wrote to that company when I saw a rebel going in a bike lane and a rebel going through a red light, and they said they're not able to monitor that. So their explanation that they can monitor everything has a lot of limitations on it. I also wrote to them when I saw someone going through a red light with a license plate, and I never heard back. So all of the proliferation of scooters, of these awful motorbikes that are treated like bicycles, is really a problem, not just for their riders, but for pedestrians as well. And I just want to add one more thing and then I'll stop, which is that part of it may be the delivery mechanism for restaurants, which is how people get paid. Their tips are part of their salary. And so the more rides, the faster they get from one place to another, the more tips they make. Maybe part of the solution might be to change the pay structure for the guys on the bikes. And that includes those motorized things, which I still don't know the name of. I think Lori told me what it was, but I just don't remember. So that's what I want to say on that. And I would support a resolution, because licensing, I think, would deter people from doing the wrong thing, and they do the wrong thing day and night. Not everybody, but enough. And there was an article, we're not Paris, but there was an article in the Times about the havoc and the chaos and the danger of riders going every which way in Paris because there's no enforcement and there are no rules. So I do want to support riders of alternative transportation because we need it for the environment, but there needs to be some accountability and some way of protecting pedestrians. I talked fast, I said a lot, I'm sorry, I'll stop. Thank you for listening.
Appreciate it. Okay, we have a member of the public I see who and is being raised. Leah Hanlon, can we recognize Leah Hanlon?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to just say that Alita Camp's observation that pedestrians need a lobby is just brilliant. It never occurred to me that there is a very active lobby for bicycles that has driven a lot of the argument, but there's nobody speaking up for pedestrians. So thank you for that observation. I wanted to comment on a couple of the things said by Billy Friedman. One of which was said, I'm sorry?
Freeland.
Sorry. I can't really read the names on my screen very well at this distance.
Well, you have to know his name to criticize him.
Okay, so Alita Camp also raised this issue, but the fact that enforcement is unequal has nothing to do with the issue of registering bikes. I mean, everyone knows that, there is unjust and inequitable enforcement, but we don't say there should be no laws against murder because it's unequally enforced. So I just find that to be somewhat disingenuous. Similarly, I wanted to take issue with the statistics that he quotes. I find that the statistics of cyclists killed by cars or pedestrians killed by cyclists are somewhat also disingenuous, because if a bicycle runs a red right in front of a car that's going through the intersection and the cyclist is struck and killed because the car is bigger than the bicycle, the cyclist is at a disadvantage in any crash. Even if it's caused by the cyclists running the red, it is attributed to the car. And so those statistics are not really meaningful. So I hope that when you all have further discussions on this subject, you will think about them a little bit more objectively. But thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you, Leah. I think we'll have to dig into the statistics because it may not be as simple as that. Okay, next up is Rita Popper, I believe. Rita?
I just have something very brief. A bicycle, can we determine, like, I don't know about classes, what classes of this is, but e-bikes are not allowed in bike lanes because those are for pedal bikes. I don't care if they have a throttle and they have an assist or whatever, but can we make that anything that has the name bike on it has to have pedals? Because actually the e-bikes are scooters, but they don't fall under scooters. Whoever did this is a brilliant marketer, and we're suffering from it. It's going to get worse. Those e-bikes are very, very expensive. So can we pass something that says that anything that has the name bike has to have pedals? Because an e-bike, I'm not going to go on. I mean, that's the crux of the matter, is that you think you're a bike, but you're not a bike. You don't know if you're a bike. You wish you were a bike. You pretend you're not a bike. I mean, do you understand this? It's insane. Thank you.
Rita, I think part of the problem, and Billy talked about the classes of e-bikes. Part of the problem was before some new laws were passed, all those things were considered motor vehicles and they weren't licensed. So they were really prohibited in New York City. And but there was speaking of lobbies, there was a lobby for people who worked for a living, who needed that, delivery people who needed that to earn a living. And the city council very strongly supported the idea that those things ought to be legalized. And that's really what they did with the latest round. And that's why all of the e-bikes, they're different classes, and they have certain, you fall into the classes based on how fast you go and whether you have an assist or a button or something like that. But they're all classified as bikes. And I hear what you're saying, but I'm saying the trend was sort of against that legislatively in the city council and in the state legislature, just sort of as reciting some history here. So I think it's a very tricky, the whole thing is extremely tricky here.
Thank you.
Peter Borak is next. Peter?
Great. Thanks so much, Chuck, and thanks for everyone's, I think, pretty useful comments. Just very briefly, I don't know what Billy's statistics are. I haven't looked at them personally, but I would just urge folks that are listening to think about a death as a death and an accidental death as an accidental death. And if a cyclist is killed, whether or not they were negligent or not, that's not something that's good. That's bad for society. It's bad for that family. If it's someone from our neighborhood, that's really sad. And so we should do whatever we can to try and protect pedestrians, cyclists, and cars, whether or not they're following the rules or not. I don't believe that anyone here thinks that anyone that doesn't follow the rules of the road should suffer the death penalty. So I would just urge folks to think that way. I'm a multimodal transportation advocate. And in the past 36 hours, I've taken the subway, the bus, city bike, I've walked, and I've driven my own car. So I can identify with some of the issues that everyone has touched on. And it's tough that, we have a set amount of space in the street and we're all trying to share it. In terms of licensing, I have some mixed views on this. I don't know if regular bikes for commercial use have to be registered. I know that Council Member Garodnik, when he was a council member, instituted a licensing process for the kind of rickshaw type tourist bikes, but I don't know. And I would just ask, Chuck or Craig, or if anyone knows, does anyone know if currently totally non-pedal assist bikes, such as a regular bike that, for example, a restaurant delivery bike, are those required to be registered?
No.
I guess that's a question.
No, they're not. They're not registered.
Thank you very much, Chuck. So, I think it's reasonable that those would be registered, because if there was an accident, just under general tort law, that restaurant would be liable for that accident. And so, in a second, I'll offer an amendment to the resolution, if the resolution is voted upon, to limit it to commercial bikes of any sort. So that's an amendment I'm going to offer in just a second. But I would just echo a point that Sharon made, which I thought was a really strong point, which is that there's a lot of problems with bikes and e-bikes in the city. And I understand they cause a lot of problems, but they are also in many ways the way of the future. So much attention in our community and in the world is being spent on climate change. We just, just think of the fact, what was the first half of this meeting was about climate resiliency. And so we should be doing things to encourage bike use, responsible bike use, safe safe for pedestrians, safe for cyclists, and safe for drivers. And so I just think it's a little premature to do this. But at the same time, I do understand some of the concerns. So I offer an amendment to restrict our call for licensing to commercial bikes only. Thank you, Chuck.
Are you proposing an amendment?
That's correct. To the extent that I'm not calling the question, and I'm not saying we should even vote on this. I think this is premature, but so I guess it's a contingent amendment. So to the extent that we do vote on the baseline resolution today, I would offer an amendment that the resolution be amended to just apply to commercial bikes.
Okay. All right. So we'll see. Let's see as we go forward what happens. Let me ask board members who haven't spoken before on this issue to speak first, and then we'll hear back. I know that Michelle has her hand up, and we'll certainly give her a chance to speak. But why not go to Elaine Walsh, because Elaine hasn't spoken on this issue. Go ahead, Elaine.
You skipped over Rebecca Dangor, but
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I got my things messed up here. I didn't mean to, I can't skip over Rebecca Dangor, who's my co-chair of the committee.
Okay.
Let me recognize Rebecca.
No worries. I'll try and keep my comments short. First, I want to echo and stress what Billy said about hearing from experts, particularly those from other countries who have different kinds of registration systems. I was actually very much looking forward to that conversation and to try and come up with a solution based on what best works elsewhere. I'm kind of figuring out a way to implement what works into perhaps a variation that would fit into the city. And second, this is kind of the other thing that I've been thinking a lot about recently is I'm pretty much very small in like every sense of the word. So like even over the weekend, the wind pushed me around. So I'm very scared of being hit by like anything, car, bike, what have you. And the thing I'm actually most afraid of right now when I'm walking is when I'm looking, when I'm crossing the street and I'm looking for a bike, whether it's motorized or not, I'm more scared because I can't usually see them because of all the traffic. And it's almost as if they're blocked by the cars. And that particular feeling kind of makes me think that really maybe the other thing we want to be hearing from these experts is about their actual street infrastructure and whether or not licensing is what's working best there or whether it's something else. So while I'm not opposed to licensing, and I definitely think there's a problem, I don't want to vote on anything until we hear from experts, which I thought everyone kind of seemed on board with last month. That's my point.
Physical size has nothing to do with your views and the importance that are given to them. Let's go to Elaine Walsh then first, and then we'll go back to and Barbara Rowe, go back to and Barry, and then we'll go back to Michelle and Billy. Elaine, go ahead. Why don't we end with Elaine?
Thank you. You know, we've been discussing this issue for a long time. I'm a native New Yorker, grew up in the neighborhood, rode a bike when I was 10 years old. Life has changed. Licensing brings with it accountability. To get a license, you have to prove you're competent in driving or riding the bike. We as a city have foregone any kind of enforcement. We did have for a period of time the restaurant bicyclists having on their backs the address and phone number of restaurants. We don't have that now. You have all these other kinds of companies who are hiring the bicyclists. I'm talking the commercial ones, and you get paid based on speed. Well, that's not an economic way to be fair to the people who are driving. We've seen the articles on how these bicyclists are being mugged and their bikes stolen, all on their own backs. We need to protect them, and one way to protect them is licensing and registration. The other thing that licensing and registration should do is you have insurance so that if there's an accident, you are going to be covered by your insurance, whether you caused it or not, which then helps pay for your medical and not put it on the city payroll by the city backs. I am shocked. And I hear about all the bicycle advocates. This is not about biking. It's about a mode of transportation that has taken on its own life. If all of a sudden we had little mini cars that would fit in the lanes, would we allow it? No, because we license and register. And that's what we need. We go through, you know, if I think it's under 12, you have to have a helmet. I can't believe all of the adults that ride a bike without a helmet. And then when they have a head injury, whose fault is it? So I'm for licensing insurance, and registration. Because when I have called in a complaint on a bike, they say to me, but we can't do anything because we don't have any license to follow. We have no information, which is true. And I'm not going to repeat what everybody else has said about how they have been leveled to the ground by the attitude of the bicyclists. And a lot of them are not the commercial bikers. Okay? It is regular citizens who have empowered themselves through privilege to do whatever they want to do. This is not our city. This is not a fair way for us to live. Think about when you grew up. You were crossing the street and you were taught, look one way, right? Because traffic usually came in one direction. Think about that. Today, what do? I go left, right, left, and run. That's not how I was brought up. So there needs to be accountability. And we can talk about this on and on. But unless we get some type of accountability through a license and registration so we can track the violators, where are we? 2nd Avenue is a mess with the speed. They go faster than cars. On 3rd Avenue, they don't care. They go both ways. And somebody talked about crisscross. That's what they do. I'd love to take my car and say, oh, I'm going to make a turn and I'm going to crisscross across the street. I get a ticket. I don't know why we have a privileged part of the society. And I think we are negligent as a board not to take into consideration our community who have constantly told us and complained about the issue. And we have the largest elderly population in the city. And they are petrified to cross the street. So I ask that we support a resolution that has licensing, enforcement, etc., and take your traffic agents and give them another job other than ticketing double parking. Thank you. I'm fed up.
Thank you. Let's take Barbara Rudder. Can we unmute Barbara?
I have a couple of questions. I actually supported a bike lane because it was about bikes. To me, the bikes are not as scary, but it's the whether you call them e-bikes or whatever you want to call it, the motorized, that have become so overwhelmingly prevalent. I was once eating outside and I was watching, there was not one regular pedal block, the one that Elaine rode when she was 10 years old. It was all E and going so fast. So first of all, and it was not just the delivery guys, there was fathers with their children and on scooters and things like that. So first of all, I would support Michelle's resolution. I would not support the amendment because I would not want to limit it. I don't understand when something goes as fast, if not faster than cars, why they're in the bike lane. As a pedestrian, I'm a 90% a pedestrian. I don't drive. And, unless I'm using some other transportation, I walk. I treat bike lanes differently than the street. We were told that we can cross if nobody's coming. A regular bike, I can see coming at a decent time. The E's come so quickly that I look and within 2 seconds, they're on top of me. I don't know why, in addition, I'm certainly all for the licensing, but why can't we say that if you go as fast as 25 miles an hour, you belong in the street and not in the bike lane? Is that possible? Is that, I know you said something, Chuck, and I don't understand the answer.
No, we were talking about licensing, how the city.
No, but it was also the licensee is that everything, Elaine, and I won't repeat what the others have said. I totally agree with. This gives you a chance. I mean, the police have said they give tickets. Well, how do you know if it's paid? If a car gets stopped and gets a ticket, 5 years later, they still know that you haven't paid the car ticket. They know that. They don't know anything with bikes. So why observe anything?
Well, okay. Well, thank you, Barbara. Let me go to Barry Schneider, and then we'll come back to Michelle and Billy.
Good evening, and thank you very much, Chuck. This is a very robust and very valuable discussion. I'd like to table the motion based on Billy's comments, perhaps to a time certain, if you can find a date when you want to have that kind of discussion dedicated to this meeting.
Sure. Well, is there a second to that motion? Is Rita?
There's a second.
Billy seconded it.
Billy seconded.
Remember, you can use the thumbs up action to second things.
By the way, that's still, since it's to a time certain, that's still debatable motion. It's not just a straight.
That's correct.
So anyone who wants to comment on that, I'll let Michelle next, because Michelle is, why don't you go ahead, Michelle? Let's unmute Michelle.
Thanks, Chuck. If it's debatable, I would not be for tabling. To me, that's again kicking the can down the road. We've been doing this for 7 years already. Let me tell you, those of you who think that you want to encourage cycling and you're concerned that licensing a bike or an e-bike or a scooter will discourage cycling. We don't want to encourage cycling. We want to encourage compliant cycling. Like with any activity, we don't remove rules and regulations and laws to make some action happen more frequently, whether or not that action is not good for the public or would be against a law. That's not reasoning that you don't want to enforce cycling laws because you're afraid of diminishing the number of cyclists. You want compliant cyclists like you want in everything. Those of you who say that with reference to the accidents and the numbers, I support what Leah had said. You never know when an accident is reported who caused it. There are many times that even with cars, that a car speeding can actually pass another two cars, which because they slow down to avoid having an accident, those two cars have an accident, when in fact they are not the cause. This happens with bikes all the time, drivers swerving not to hurt non-compliant cyclists. So we want compliance. Those of you who say this is the wave of the future, no, it is not the wave of the future. People ride bikes, that's great. The same number of people that rode bikes in the past still do. What has increased are the numbers of cyclists in the city. It's not that the number of cyclists people didn't run out and learn how to ride a bike at age 40 because you built a bike lane. We accommodated because we tried to make the city more cycling friendly. And so we are encouraging bike riders to ride their bikes in the city. And that is what's happening with skateboarders and scooters and all that. To Peter's suggested amendment, I too would not accept it. I'm sorry, Peter, because it's not only the commercial cyclists that are the issue. And it's not even licensing the cyclists, it's licensing the machine. That's what you're identifying. I don't expect a private person that has learned to ride a bike at age 10 and is now riding a bike at age 35 to go out and get a license to ride his bike. It would become very apparent very quickly if he got on his bike and he couldn't ride it. He would fall off very quickly. What I want is for that cyclist, if he causes an accident, is part of an accident, or gets hurt in an accident, I want him to be identifiable, be covered, have insurance, And that would protect anybody that he hurt as well. You can have a victim of a cycling accident, and that victim has absolutely no recourse. That victim has to pay their own medical and all their own doctor's bills and hospital bills. This is not fair. But don't think it's the way of the future. And in terms of a remedy of having those companies that employ companies, bike delivery companies, to have them provide education, that's already active. That's already in the law because they face liability. So it's in their best interest to make sure that their cyclists are educated and are compliant. We're talking about compliance now. We're not talking about some overall philosophy of life about whether or not traveling by anything except an automobile is better than traveling by automobile. We're not talking about that. But cycling will never take over the world in terms of a commercial enterprise. Commerce will always be conducted on four wheels. Look what's happening to your supply chain shortage now because you don't have enough truckers. We haven't engaged any cyclists to take the stuff from the port in LA all the way to New York to supply the supply chain. So let's not get carried away with the importance of this in our general way of life. With all of this, we have talked about this for years and years and years. And what I'm hearing is there are cycling advocates that are maintaining that position. But if you look at it in a realistic way with how the world is functioning in our city, in our community, the population is aging. That's not true everywhere, but that's true here. And it would be of no interest to me how this is working out in other cities because other cities are not New York. And you can pick out, we once had a plaza study of Columbia, how plazas, how reconfiguring the street and putting in more pedestrian plazas worked in Columbia. Well, and apparently it worked very well. I can't say that for New York. I say plazas that have cut off circulation of all kinds of vehicles have not done us very well in New York. I think we have enough information, both anecdotal and statistical, to tell us that something needs to be done about alternative transportation. They need accountability, they have to have liability, and they have to have insurance. And that is for the protection for pedestrians, the community as a whole, as well as the drivers of those vehicles. I urge you not to be afraid of this resolution. I don't think you have given up anything. I think supporting this resolution will only say that Community Board 8 supports compliant bike riders, compliant cyclists of all kinds, and is respectful of everyone in the driving population and in the pedestrian population. I urge you to support it.
Michelle, I understand how you feel strongly about it and have felt strongly for a long time. I'd just like to make a few comments and thoughts on this because I think while we've been discussing it and it's come up over the years, we haven't seriously focused on it really for that long, number one. I mean, I know you've been raising it and that's fine. My sense is that it's still one of these issues that does divide the board. I'm not sure how the resolutions would come out, but my own view is that I think it's premature still to do that. I think there are serious issues on your side of the equation about accountability and ability to enforce. But I think there are serious issues on the other side of the equation. And I think we need, my own sense is that I think we need more time to really focus in on them in a very targeted way to see if there's a way to come up with something that might make sense. So my hope would be to convince you and others to, at this point, hold off when we have a resolution pending and we could make it to a time certain. So we would know that we would have to come back and take some action by a time certain. But I think you get more support for your position if you were, at that point now. So that's my only thought I'd like to present to you. And I know you have your hand raised, and if you want to respond to that, obviously it's up to you how you want to handle this. But
yeah, I do want to respond, because unless you can tell me right now what you are going to do to bring voices to this table that is going to change anything, what information or what person or what anything are you going to bring to the table that is going to do anything to change this conversation? We have been talking about getting more information for years. We have statistics, we have our observations, we have our points of view. If you look at who thinks what about what, it's pretty predictable. Actually, I don't think you have any surprises. And I think if some people don't want to vote for this resolution, I don't think they're going to vote for it down the road. I don't think you are going to come up with any speaker, any information, any statistic, anything, whether you have 5 more meetings about this or 2 more meetings or no more meetings, that is going to change the minds of people who are opposed to this. So my feeling is I would like to go ahead with it. Those of you who want to vote it down, vote it down. I realize that this is a big uphill fight at the full board, and I'm hoping that we can get the word out to the public and people can come out and speak their mind. And I hope that those members of the board that are in supportive of this and have been for a long time will also speak their mind. And you know what? If the full board votes it down, it votes it down. And I think that going on record for voting down such an important issue for public safety would do more to harm the board's position than anything else. So I'm not afraid of the vote. I think we sort of have to do it, because I don't think you can tell me now what you're going to bring to the table that's going to change anybody's mind. What new information do you have, or will you have?
Can I just respond to that? Because I feel like, Michelle, by you saying that, you're essentially suggesting that by bringing in an expert, by bringing in the perspective of people who have experiences elsewhere in trying to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, because I don't think anyone argues with the merits of what you are saying is an issue. I think we can all agree that bike safety and the need to do a better job of having people operate bikes safely, and to perhaps clarify some of the contradictory policies that are out there in terms of how bikes are or aren't registered or licensed is entirely a valid conversation. But I think what you're saying here is we don't need to further actually figure out, if we were to move forward with this, how we would be able to be most effective in doing so, and to lay all our cards on the table now before we have the chance to really thoroughly think through this. And I think maybe you feel very strongly that no one's minds are going to change, but I think there are actually people who really respect people's experts' opinions and potential nuance to try to think through, if this were to move forward, how do you do it in a truly effective, meaningful way that has a chance of actually succeeding, rather than just hoping for the best and then the state doesn't take any action because we're sort of on our own island possibly by doing this. So I just want to raise that concern, and I agree entirely with Chuck and the points that he raised in terms of why I think it is premature to do this, and bringing in potential experts is something that would be a worthwhile use of all of our time.
Well, let me just say this, Chuck. I respect what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. And of course, it's always good to hear from as many points of view as possible. However, in your mention, you are admitting that there is an issue here. It does need to be addressed. There are many ways to address it. That may be absolutely true. But what I'm talking about tonight is licensing, and licensing only. And I specifically said when I introduced the resolution that I would not pretend to write it for the state. In other words, they may put restrictions on it. They may have a million different things that they would put into a law that I was not prepared to discuss tonight. And I said that at the outset. The only thing I am prepared to discuss tonight, and I think we have enough information about it, is licensing. Only licensing. The state can then write the bill. They can limit where it is. Maybe it's only in certain cities, a certain population, a certain age group, a certain, 1,000 different things. And by your own admission, something needs to be done. I'm proposing that one of the things that needs to be done is licensing, but I'm not defining what that means or how it's carried out or how it's enforced. So I just want to make that clear. I think there's plenty of room to advocate for licensing. And again, I don't mean of the person, I mean of the vehicle. I think there's plenty of room to do that without stepping on any toes about and we can still hear from experts and hear how things went in other cities, et cetera, et cetera. And you also have to understand that statistics are a very funny thing. You can play with statistics and you can make them say whatever you want it to say. So I'm talking about licensing as a concept where when you try to control activity and you try to enforce activities, even with something like dog watching, licensing is something, you have to get a fishing license. Why do you have to get a fishing license? I mean, if you have a stream and you can fish, why can't you just fish? Well, there are reasons for licensing. There are rules and there are regulations. It doesn't mean that you can't fish. It just means that you're looking for compliancy. And that's what we're looking for here. So I hope that explains my position. I don't think it's a radical one. And I just think that there's been so much discussion about it. We were supposed to have experts at this meeting. The discussion of experts happened a couple of months ago, but we've never had experts, whatever that means, I have to say. So I'm not sure about the expert as an expert. I would like to hear more objective points of view, let's put it that way. So I'm not convinced that we can't go ahead. I'm sorry.
I perfectly understand your feeling, and you're certainly you should press ahead with what you feel like. But I think when you talk about the concept of licensing, that means many things to many people, and I understand your nuances, which are appropriate. But I don't think most people are going to get that if they come to vote on it. And all I'm suggesting to you is that I think what you're trying to accomplish might be done more effectively if we started doing a little slower, getting some people in to talk about what kind of licensing scheme that might be useful. Not licensing, you're talking more about registration. And I know some of the things you talked about before, and there may be ways to get very close or closer to what you want. But I think, at this point, I think we need a little more time. That's all I'm saying. And obviously it's up to you. And, we have Barry's motion that's pending first on the floor. And so we have to deal with that. But I think, my sense is that we would focus on it in a concentrated way. And I'd like to hear from some people. I'd like to hear from whether it's some city council members, or whether it's some people who've tried licensing before, what kind of licensing they've done, whether it's some places, where there are other parts of the country who've done something, and maybe we can get some information from them. I think there's a lot of information that would be helpful to help the board reach a decision and see if there are ways to deal with the issues. But again, it's obviously up to you. And if we want to press ahead, then, the issue that's on the floor right now is Barry's issue of tabling it to a time certain. And we would put a time certain, maybe it's a few months. Obviously, the issue's been going on another couple of months. If we can get some meaningful information, in my view, would not be wasted. Well, why don't we just go? There's people with their hands raised up. Billy, I asked him, we've sort of been interrupting him, but go ahead, Billy.
Thanks, Chuck. So I support the motion to table, and let me just say a few things why. One is, and I want to borrow from something Michelle has taught me and said over the years, with respect to congestion pricing and other things, I don't vote for concepts. And here we have, I think, a concept kind of on the table that's not well defined. What will licensing regime look like? Who would it apply to? I think if there's any instance in which we shouldn't be voting for a concept, Michelle, it's this one. And so I do think waiting is important. Yes, to hear from experts, but also to better define what the concept and what the licensing regime looks like exactly. I would like to hear from people who know the experiences of other cities and why licensing has failed in those places. I also want to know more about the unintended consequences of unequal enforcement. And I know Ms. Hanlon spoke to, earlier about this, and my point perhaps being disingenuous, but with respect, I don't think we should take lightly creating new laws and new regimes that we know are going to have disparate racial effects. We shouldn't take that lightly. And just because it exists in other instances of law enforcement that currently exist does not mean we should create a new one. And I think we should take that obligation very seriously. And as a board, these last 2 years, we have been grappling with social justice and racial justice. Let's try to actually apply that here in this instance. And then I guess, lastly, I would just say, Michelle was talking, is biking the future or not? Look, 1.8 million more bike trips in 2020 than 2019. City bike, record highs. I think at one point this year, 650,000 trips taken, a record high for city bike. On the Queensboro Bridge, 35% increase in bike ridership over the Queensboro. And as others have mentioned today, we have these new companies springing up, like 1520 is one in our neighborhood. They're promising 15-minute deliveries. It is the future, whether we like it or not. And the question for us is, what are we going to do to respond to that? I think we should be putting in infrastructure. I think we should be making sure that companies are treating their employees right. I want to echo something Elaine said earlier. We should have a living wage. Well, I don't know if this is precisely what she said, but we should be paying delivery cyclists adequately, meaning in my view, a living wage with full benefits, and getting away from this economy where everything has to be delivered within 5 minutes or else you don't get a tip. So those are the things I'd like us to be grappling with and not voting on this concept right now. Let's hear from experts. Let's be well informed. And I don't think there's necessarily a rush, because anything we propose, Albany's not going to be in session for a couple months at least. So nothing we propose would, go to Albany until they're in session in January at least.
Right. Okay, thank you. Rita Popper, let's go to Rita next.
I have something very simple. We've been doing this for years, the same argument for years, that the bikers on our board are excellent bikers, and the people on our board are excellent pedestrians. We are not talking about the excellent bikers and the excellent pedestrians. And I think that one picture is worth 1,000 words. And I would like to be able to, I don't know where to go. I'm going to leave it all up to you, Chuck, and Craig, that we need to have visuals of what we are talking about. We need to have, I'm not talking a Broadway production, I'm talking about home video, but a filmers who will go, I'll go on any street corner with people so that people understand what we're saying as pedestrians and what bikers are saying as bikers. Because right now, bikers think that pedestrians and car owners are terrible, and car owners and pedestrians think that bikers are terrible. We are never going to ever settle anything, and licensing things that we haven't settled is ridiculous. I would like to propose definitely to table this, but not have experts come in and talk to us again. We're talking about moving vehicles. Let's see what we're talking about so that people understand what we're saying. That's a suggestion I would love. It's not a resolution that we're going to do, a video, but if we can get money from city council or from the borough president's office, let's put something together and so that everybody understands what we're talking about, what the other side is talking about, what our side is talking about, so that we can see it. That is a suggestion. Frankly, we have this same conversation every single time. We have statistics on one end, we have people saying, no, but I can't cross the street. But we have statistics over here, and the cars are bad and bicycles are better. Frankly, we have got to learn to live together, and maybe we just really need better rules. I recommend it highly.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. What I think what we ought to do here, we'll have some further discussion, but I just wanted to, Barry had made a motion that was seconded to table it to a time certain, but I think we ought to put a time certain in that. So I don't know, Barry, if we can unmute Barry, and you ought to state what time we're talking about. We ought to, my suggestion would be we ought to make it a few months from now so we could give ourselves enough time to get things lined up so we could have a meaningful, by the time it comes back, we would have done some work here.
Yes, Chuck, I agree with you. Let you and Craig determine the time certain. I as former co-chair of the committee, I trust you folks implicitly. Pick a time.
Okay. All right. So, we should state a time for the motion. I wouldn't want to just come up with a time later. I would suggest February myself, because that, obviously we're going to be this is November, we're going to be in December, and that's always a tough month. In January, our month is pretty early and stuff. So I think with all that, I would suggest February as a time.
I accept your amendment to my motion.
Okay with Craig? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think it does. I also just want to mention, I got a text from Kaz. I think he had been trying to raise his hand, but I think he had been inadvertently using the thumbs ups, and I don't think he's spoken on this. So I do think we should allow him a chance to speak.
Yeah, does Cost can we unmute Cost? Let him, he hasn't spoken.
Yeah, for the past half an hour, I've been putting my hand up. It's
I think you were hitting the thumbs
down.
up. That's what happened.
No,
I noticed the thumbs up keep coming up, but
I I'd just like to call the question on Barry's motion.
Okay. Why don't we have a few speakers, and then I think I see Rebecca has thumbs up, I guess, same thing. And why don't we try to, Lori, did you, I'll get to Elaine, and Elaine has had her hand up here. And then I'll go to Lori. Elaine, go ahead.
Thank you. I agree with what Michelle has said. This has gone on for years. And the fact that now, once again, you say you want experts. We had experts on congestion pricing. We need to look at what the issues are in our community. They are not the same as looking at Ohio or wherever. When biking came up and the bike lanes, historically, it was all about health. You were going to ride your bike to improve your health. Well, now we have motorized bikes. We have whatever bikes, whatever we want to call. They don't improve your health. They just make you get from one place to another. And I'm sorry, that's not what this is about. Even the delivery people should not be forced to go through the red light and hit people just to make a delivery. And when I hear they go from Manhattan to Queens for $5 or $4, that's unacceptable. So I'd like us to now move on the issue of licensing, because I think if we license and register and have insurance, the companies that hire the delivery people are going to have to deliver a more socially justified avenue for their employees. So we're skirting something because we don't want to confront it for whatever the reason. In our neighborhood, the restaurants that abided by the laws that said your delivery people needed the vest on, the address, the phone number, they did it. It's those who will not conform that want us not to license, not to have insurance. We're here to protect our community. And that's a very broad definition. But I'm hearing today not protecting the community, but certain people. It's unacceptable. We need to go on record caring about everyone, whether you're a delivery person, a pedestrian, just a casual rider, it doesn't matter. But we're not doing that as a board. We keep skirting it because you think, some of you, that by avoiding the decision, you don't have to go to the table and to the mat and make a decision. Make a decision. This has gone on for years at this point. From the beginning, when we first had the bike lanes, when you couldn't get out of your car to go to the restaurant, because if you stepped out into the bike lane, you got killed. How many years? This is at least 10. Come on. Let's make a decision. Let's move with what Michelle has before us and move on this and get the state to become accountable, because that's what you're talking about. Because motor vehicle is under state jurisdiction, and their regulations we are in violation of. So please, let's move forward. Let's protect everybody. And let's get this going. We don't need any more experts to tell us what's going on in our streets. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Let me suggest that we now take a vote on Barry's resolution that would table this to a time certain, which is our February meeting. And I think we should vote. We've had a lot of discussion on this, and I think everybody knows where they stand on it. Not on this, but I mean on this too. And so I'd like us to move along, since it's now about 9:25. We've had a robust discussion on a number of good subjects, and I appreciate everybody's thoughts. And there's a lot of good points on all sides. I really mean that.
All right, and let me just announce those who I see present at this moment. Myself, Chuck, Rita, Alita, Lori, Elaine, Michelle, Barbara, Kaz, Barry, Billy, John, Peter, Rebecca, Sharon, Valerie. If anyone did not hear their name and is a member, please raise your hands.
We have everybody. Why don't Craig, why don't you just call the roll on Barry's motion? So we'll this way you can get everybody down, so we won't just as easy.
Okay. I'm just gonna go in the order that I have it written down.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm gonna start. I'm a no. And Chuck.
This is on the motion to table.
It's a table. If this is a motion to table, yes. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I'm a yes. Chuck.
Yes.
All right. Rita. Actually, you know what? Let me switch up. For Will, it'll be much easier if we go down the line. I realize that. So
yeah, can we just go down in alphabetical order?
Yeah.
Yes.
Order, yeah.
All right.
Yes. Sorry about that. Alita.
Alita.
Abstain.
Barbara Rudder. Barbara Rudder, please unmute.
No.
Barry Schneider.
Yes.
You. Billy Freeland.
Yes.
Cause Spagnoletti. Cause unmute.
I raise my thumb. Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Elaine Walsh.
No.
John Phillips.
Yes.
Lori Boris.
Yes.
Michelle Birnbaum.
No.
Peter Borak.
Yes.
That was a yes, right? Okay, great. Rebecca Dangor.
Yes.
Rita Popper,
Yes.
Sharon Pope Marshall,
Yes.
and Valerie Mason.
Yes.
If I missed anyone,
Yeah.
please raise your hand now.
And you got me beforehand. You got Craig and I.
Yes. So that is 12 yes, 3 no, 1 abstain.
Okay, well, thanks. So we will come back, and I promise that we will have a lot more information and expertise. And I will just point out, as a matter of personal privilege, I have never done anything but vote yes or no on anything since I've been a member of this board. So I don't have that much trouble making up my mind. But anyhow, thank you for everyone. It's a good discussion. And there are a lot of serious issues, really serious on all sides, and we view them seriously. So why don't I know we've got some new and old business. So those, I know that Charlie wanted to raise an issue if he's still here. Charlie Whitman, yes, he's still persevering. And why don't I ask, go ahead, Charlie. You had some new business. He was here last meeting to try to raise it, but had technical difficulties. Can we unmute Charlie?
Sure, I'll take it ahead. I'll try to make it brief. I know you've been through a long meeting. My name is Charles Whitman. I live at 45 East End Avenue. As some of you know, I was one of the community representatives on the 81st Street Pedestrian Bridge Project, working through CBA Transportation Committee with the city agencies involved. I'm very excited about the new project for the renewal of the Esplanade from 81st to 90th Street, which will restore that stretch aesthetically, practically, and bring it into compliance with new standards. I commend everyone who made it possible. The presentation to Joint Parks and Transportation Committee was made in June of 2021 with the intent of presenting a design for the first phase from 81st to 84th Street by December. I'm interested in getting an update on the first phase. What is the status of the design stage? Is it still on target for completion in December? And finally, but very important, will the community directly affected by the project be consulted during the design process? The two residential buildings most affected in the first stage are 45 East End and 33. 45 fronts half a block of the Esplanade from 81st to 82nd. In addition, if the cul-de-sac is impacted by the plans for the Esplanade, 45 fronts the block from the stairs at 81st Street to East End Avenue and has its service entrance in the cul-de-sac at the base of the stairs. 33 fronts the cul-de-sac and has its main entrance at the midpoint in the cul-de-sac. The 81st Street cul-de-sac is the only cul-de-sac in the project which may undergo significant changes. We look forward to getting an update on the project and hope that DOT and Parks will reach out through the committee to the community representatives. We've worked in the past to help achieve what's best for our residents and the overall community, and hope we're given the opportunity to do it once again. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Charlie. I would mention that I had the pleasure of working with Charlie for a long time as part of the group of citizens that acted extremely responsibly and really had the facts and really worked their way through the city process after knowing nothing about it. And it was a good lesson in community participation. And I appreciate Charlie and all the work that he did in helping coordinate that effort. The only thing I can say is, and I know that Barry, I think, is still here because Tricia Shimamura, the other co-chair of the Parks Department, and it's Parks that has the lead on doing some of the Esplanade stuff. We'll try to coordinate and see what kind of information that we can get on this. Barry, you probably have more up-to-date information than I do about what's happening at this point. Can we unmute Barry for a minute?
Barry, you can unmute.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. Chuck, I have nothing to offer this time, but we have a meeting tomorrow with the Parks Committee, and I will find out before the meeting and be able to make a report of the meeting if I get sufficient information. But thank you, Charlie, for bringing it to our attention.
Okay, thanks. If I could just say, I was planning to attend Parks tomorrow, knowing it was a joint committee and make the same kind of approach. So you'll see me at the meeting tomorrow as well, Barry.
Good, good. I have all that information. Thank you.
And Barry, I'll
Yes.
discuss with you some of the issues that came up during our time when we were dealing with the pedestrian bridge.
All right, fine. You and I will talk tomorrow before the meeting, Charlie. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Charlie.
Good. Thanks very much.
I know that there are others. I didn't know whether also, let's see who, I know Alita, I guess Alita had something that you wanted to raise. Alita, Cam.
I just want to ask, I know it's probably not possible, but because this is such a hot topic and there are so many facets of the bikes and talking about licensing, if you could make it a dedicated meeting or as much as possible to that, just so that there is a thorough discussion, because I think that will also make a difference to the board and being able to analyze it is to read the minutes. And I know what an excellent job Craig does on those. Also, I'm wondering about the 5G polls and if DOT is coming back to transportation to talk about them and what the design issue is. The community board should have an opportunity to weigh in before any kind of design is finalized.
I agree with what you said. We will try to make that discussion on the bikes, the main focus of the meeting. Yeah, we'll see. Obviously, we'll see what's, but that's what we'll try to do, definitely. And the idea, we tried to get them to actually come to this meeting, do it, but they wouldn't do it. They to coin a phrase, they basically were reaching out, sort of separately to community boards, and they said they wouldn't come to individual boards. But I think we're going to press them to do that, or I think we ought to just take it up ourselves, because I think a lot of us share the same concern that you're talking about. These are going to be much higher and bigger, and it's just another, a whole bunch of those going up is just another situation of what we try to avoid if we can. But
thank you.
Sure. Let's see. Rebecca Dangor had something. Rebecca.
New business. I'm not sure whether or not we want to invite Rebel back or you reach out to them personally, because the question I asked during that meeting was to ensure that we could report their vehicles in the bike lanes. And I have seen them, and I was disappointed to hear that Alita was unable to take action on that. So whether it's just reaching out to them and reminding them of what they said or having them return.
Yeah, good idea, Rebecca. I think why don't we just reach out to them, and if not, and we may get them back again and let them face the music directly.
I have the note of them confirming. So
no, I know you're absolutely right. I remember when the spokesperson was here and said that, and as people said, our minutes that Craig really puts mostly together are always terrific. Valerie Mason, I know Valerie said you had a point to raise or bring us up to date on 72nd Street.
Yeah. Hi. So at the last meeting, there was a discussion with Colleen Chattergoon and the Department of Transportation regarding the corner at 72nd Street and 3rd Avenue.
Yeah.
And so I was able to go out on a site visit with Colleen and Danny, who is a 24-year veteran of the DOT and works with the traffic lights, et cetera. And it was a great 25 minutes. They saw all the bikes going through what was supposed to be a protected pedestrian, what is our favorite phrase? It's like a cushion or a pork chop when you come out into the corner, and pedestrians thought that was a place they could stand to be closer to get to the other side. Well, meanwhile, the bikes were going right through. Interestingly enough, there were two Con Edison, horses, and Danny put them to block the bikes from coming through. And everyone thought it was a great idea if DOT could get some what they call granite stopping things to stop the bikes from coming through. Their first suggestion was for us to sponsor some planters to stop the bikes from coming through. But we realized that that wouldn't help because they wouldn't go straight across. And so Colleen and DOT are looking for a way to get some granite stoppers out there. Right now, we're lucky that the 2 Con Edison horses are still out there, and only one has been moved. I actually moved the other one back myself the other day. And so she's asked Con Edison to keep those out there as long as possible, but somebody actually moved one. I think there's a city bike station there. So somebody moved one, but I put it back. But then Danny took a look at the traffic lights and he observed that, yes, they're not timed correctly. So it was really great that we went out there. We stood out there for almost 45 minutes and he observed everything. And he said that there is some tinkering he can do with the lights and that hopefully that will make some kind of difference. And he saw how the pedestrians, there's like a waiting light there and it's very disconcerting. And you don't really, if you're looking as a pedestrian at the passenger light, or you look at the light, you see the green light for the turn, but you don't realize that it doesn't belong to, it's not supposed to instruct the pedestrian. It's instructing the cars to make a left turn. That's not really clear. So he's looking at some other signage. So all in all, it was a good visit. They're going to get back to me with what they're going to actually implement. And then hopefully we can see if that works better and see if the corner works better. It was, I have to say, one of the best visits that I've had with DOT, where they, quite frankly, were able to acknowledge what the problem was, and that hearing about it at a meeting and actually seeing it are 2 different things, because they never realized, I think, how bad it was. It was also great because there were tons of people who were watching us who came over and kept telling them how bad the corner was. So it was a great site visit. So I'm hoping that good things come from it. That's all I wanted to say.
No, I'm good. I'm glad that worked out of the meeting. It came out that way. Great. Thanks, Valerie, for that report.
Sure.
Appreciate it. Michelle Birnbaum.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to share that I went to the Do It presentation. So I'll share some of what they said. The good news from our point of view is they are really not planning to put any in below 96th Street in our district. That they're focusing on areas that do not have the 5G. And they claim that as an area, we will have it even without these poles going up here, because the other providers are providing it via the other infrastructure. The other piece of good news was that these structures are not, the sponsors are not dependent on advertising on these structures as a revenue source, which, if you remember, is what put us in direct conflict with the old links, because they wanted more and more advertising on it and more locations covered, because advertising was how they were making their money. But what they're going to try to do here, it doesn't matter for them. They can put the least amount of polls in a place, because they're not depending on advertising for revenue. And also, these things carry a signal 450 feet, whereas the old ones were 250 feet. And so we needed more on a block. So that was all the good news. The other thing is, if you really can't, 90% of the stuff is also being put in the outer boroughs. But the good thing is, if you want to see this presentation and they won't come to see it, they won't come to talk to us about it, you can see the whole presentation on YouTube. It was only about an hour and a half maximum. I don't know whether or not they recorded that particular one with the questions, but the presentation is there. So if you can't get them, you can maybe tell people to go and look at it, or maybe we can even show it. Depends on the kind of time that you have or whatever. But I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Michelle. That's very helpful. That's very interesting news. Appreciate you bringing that up. Let's see. Our last speaker, Koss.
Yeah, some time ago, we were going to write a letter to DOT about inspecting areas rather than specific locations. Did that letter ever go out?
Yeah, I thought
think I brought-
you did bring it up, and then I thought that at that point it was addressed. So if I misunderstood at that point, that we hadn't moved past it.
Yeah, if we can go out rather, I'd rather give DOT an area between 72 and 96 rather than 1414 First Avenue or something. So
All right. So now we have 2 letters to write.
good. Thanks, Craig.
You're welcome.
So I think we're ready to adjourn. I appreciate everybody's interested and vigorous discussion tonight on a couple of subjects that they're very complex in many ways. And so we'll see everyone in December, or earlier actually, since we have not only the meeting, though we have our commemoration for Barbara coming up next week. So
I was just going to make an official motion to adjourn.
Okay. Officially moved and seconded by anyone, and we are adjourned. So I thank everyone
Good night,
for their
everyone.
good participation. Take care.